The Team House with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey folks, this is episode 381 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy. With our guest tonight is Major General retired Pete Gallagher. He served for 35 years as a signals officer, 12 of those in the special operations community, 7 of those years in Army special mission units. All kinds of different interesting assignments throughout the war on terror and beyond here that we're going to get into. Thanks, Pete, for joining us on the show tonight.
Hey, Jack, it's my pleasure. Thanks. I want to give a shout out to Frank DeLessio. He obviously connected us, a good friend from ATF, did some crazy things there for that task force, and I'm glad he made the connection there. It's an honor to be on there.
And folks out there can go and find Frank on 2 episodes we've done in the past. Frank was a undercover ATF guy who's infiltrating Nazi motorcycle gangs.
Yeah.
He's got some stories. So yeah, you guys can go back in time and find those if you want.
But he also runs a pretty awesome Black River Tobacco Company. He runs a cigar lounge about 15 minutes from me. It's like my Cheers. I'm like Norm, and Frank's like Sam, and that's my Cheers.
Is that down in, is it South Carolina?
No, it's in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
It's in Dunn, North Carolina, right off I-95. So
okay.
Anybody out there listening, if you're traveling down I-95 and you want a really nice cigar lounge to come in and smoke a stick and have some brown water, Frank's a great American, and he'll take good care of you.
That's awesome. So Pete, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everyone. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how that eventually took you towards military service.
Yeah, so I was born in a place called Pittsburgh, Kansas, in the southeast corner of the state, right in the 4-state area. So you got Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas right in that area. I grew up, middle-class family. My dad owned a construction company. He built those metal buildings, and throughout the 4-state area, any industrial park would be, building. You'd find a bunch of metal buildings built by Gallagher Construction Company. My mom kept the books. I was the 4th of 6 kids. They tried to do everything they could to give us a quality of life. I mean, sent us to a Catholic school there, and we had a swimming pool in our yard, but it was always leaking. It was nasty. It was miserable. By the time we got it clean in the summer, summer was almost over. We had a little cabin by the lake, a grand lake that was never finished. It was one of these things that was always a work in progress. My dad had a boat and it leaked all the time. So he tried to give us the great American, dream, but it was interesting, kind of times. But unfortunately, my 2 older sisters and my older brother, they had moved out of the house. I was in high school and I had 2 younger brothers. My dad passed away when he was 51 years old. And that was pretty significant for me because my mom was a wreck. And she, every year, going back to the, Catholic school and construction company, every summer I'd work for my dad, right? And I'd work with all these misfits, these wage grade misfit guys that were just, rude talking, cuss. Every other word was a cuss word. Every night after work, they'd be, pouring down the beers. And I'm this teenage kid, trying to work out and get ready for high school football, working construction in the summer. And every time I'd start the school year, I'd have to kind of decompress and get back into making sure I wasn't saying something stupid in front of Sister Mary Elephant there at the Catholic school. You know what I mean? But one year in particular, it was the summer of 1980. I was getting ready to go into my senior year in July 25th. Typically my dad would wake me up on a Monday morning and, kind of chew my ass, tell me it was time to get up and get ready for work. And that morning, my mom woke me up just in shock because my dad wasn't breathing. And he had died in his sleep of a heart attack. And it kind of changed the game for me. I was a little bit of a hellion. I wasn't the best student in the world, probably B's and C's, occasional less than that. But I immediately had to grow up. I immediately had to, 16, almost 17 years old. I had a kind of a shock to the system there where I really needed to grow up and take care of my mom and take care of my 2 younger brothers and kind of figure out life. And it kind of launched me into trying to become the adult in the house. Like I said, my mom was a wreck, and so trying to navigate that because all three of my older siblings were out of the house at the time. So that was a kind of a wake up moment for me. And then that same fall, I had a brand new high school football coach. He was just a model citizen. He was a math teacher and high school coach, and I really liked him a lot. I mean, he was, I was trying to do everything I could to, make sure he knew I was going to be his go-to guy on the football team my senior year. But I was also pretty good at math. And so as I was going through my senior year, I knew I wanted to go to college. And I knew I was looking at trying to play football. I didn't have any real offers. There was a couple junior colleges that, offered some scholarships, but Pittsburgh State University in Kansas, the Gorillas, they were an NAIA football powerhouse at the time. Now they're Division II, but I decided he recommended that I walk on to Pitt State. And one of the other things he said, he had a really good buddy when he was going to college that was ROTC cadre at Pitt State, an airborne ranger, a guy named Kurt Long. And Chuck introduced me to Kurt, and Chuck Smith was he's legendary football coach, but that was his first year there. But he said, if I had it all to do over again, I would have got commissioned and I would have served at least 4 years. He goes, I highly recommend you join ROTC, at least for the first 2 years, give it a shot. You'll learn a little bit about leadership. You'll get to shoot guns. You'll get to rappel off the, Russ Hall. You'll get to, you'll learn a little bit about leadership, but you're also going to be able to boost your GPA. And so for me, I was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll try that. So as a freshman going into Pitt State, I had a girlfriend, ended up marrying her later, but I go into Pitt State and, I'm working at the library. I'm, majoring in mathematics. I'm playing football. I've got a couple other part-time things I'm doing. And my freshman year on the football team, I didn't make the varsity. I was on, but I started on the junior varsity. We had like 5 games. So every other year back then, they would either redshirt the freshmen or they would allow them to play, junior varsity. So I had the opportunity to play in a few games, starting at outside linebacker there at Pitt, and it was a lot of fun. And I went in through spring ball. I go through summer. And I get to the fall of my sophomore year, and I feel like I'm doing pretty good. I had a really good off season and kind of working to get ready. And I realized, a bunch of JUCO transfers came in that were freaking super fast, super strong. And they came in, and I started noticing my position on the depth chart going down instead of going up. And so after we had a scrimmage, and I kind of got juked by the quarterback and I missed a tackle, and I got yanked out of the scrimmage, and I didn't get to go back in. And then Monday, it was a scrimmage on a Saturday. Monday, I go back in there and I see I've dropped 2 positions on the depth chart. I just started thinking about everything I was trying to balance, trying to major, trying to, do okay in academics, having a girlfriend, and load balancing all this stuff. And then I was still having fun with the ROTC stuff, but I just didn't have time to do it. And so I made a decision to hang up my cleats and focus on something that I could actually maybe go pro in, right? And my thoughts are, if I stuck it out, I may have been able to start as a senior, but you never know. And I just wasn't going to waste the time and energy, because college sports is like a full-time job, and I don't think I was good enough. I had great hands. I was probably big enough, but I don't know if I was fast enough. There was a lot of speedsters coming in there. And it was just, it was a conscious decision. It was almost like one that you make it and you don't want to make it, but when you make it, it was the right choice, right? And so I did that, and I decided to kind of go all in on a military, at least do 4 years. And that was kind of what he said, try to go active duty and do at least 4 years. And so, I got married in 1984, ended up going to the ROTC advanced camp, and I had no idea what branch I wanted to go, and a lot of guys wanted to go aviation. A lot of guys wanted to go MI. A lot of guys wanted to go infantry. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to, what I thought is I was going to go in 4 years, and I wanted something technical to go with my math degree so I could learn something and be marketable. And so, when I was out at Fort Riley for the ROTC advanced camp, I learned a little bit about Signal Corps and what they do. And I was like, maybe I'll go Signal Corps, see what that's all about. And so I put that down. I ended up getting my first choice. I got commissioned in '85. I still had to do my student teaching. I was majoring in math and phys ed at the time, and had to do student teaching, and my wife had to do her student teaching as well. So we didn't actually, enter active duty until summer of 1986. And I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia there, and it was kind of the beginning of my Signal Corps journey.
That's cool. So you had to go through, I mean, I guess I should just ask you, what's like that process of becoming a signals officer? Like, what is your kind of like advanced individual training and all that stuff, that kind of pipeline?
Yeah, so as an officer, every officer, now they call it BOLIC, Basic Officer Leadership Course, but back then they called it SOBC, Signal Officer Basic Course, and it's almost 6 months. It's at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and they train you on all the foundational stuff of how to be an officer. Okay, and it builds on everything you get, whether you're OCS or West Point or ROTC. They start building that foundation of, okay, this is what it's going to be like for you to be successful as a platoon leader or as a battalion level staff officer. These are the things you need to know, the things you need to learn. A lot of focus on PT, a lot of focus on maintenance, logistics, all the fundamentals, the accountability, maintenance, all the readiness kind of things that a good platoon leader needs to learn and know. They teach you all that, but then they really focus on the technical skills. And at the time, when I was at Gordon, I got pinpointed. Everybody was either getting Korea or Germany, and then a few folks would get like Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Fort Hood, or Fort Bragg. Those were like the big, places where most folks were trying to go. And I didn't know much about any of those. I actually wanted to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I put that in as my first assignment. But I didn't. I wanted to go there because that's where my wife was born, and we were, thinking about, going out there and just seeing what it was like. But I ended up getting pinpointed to 3rd Infantry Division in Würzburg, Germany. And so after I graduated the Signal Basic course, I was actually, my wife got pregnant with our first son. It was actually, it's interesting because his birthday is exactly 9 months after my birthday. I'm not sure that's coincidental or not, but he was born in, when I graduated Fort Gordon, I ended up going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for this very technical school on computer networking. And I kind of realized it was a graduate level training at the Air Force Institute of Technology. And I went from 6 months at Fort Gordon to 6 months there. And it was kind of nerd geek, 101 kind of stuff. I mean, it was not in my wheelhouse, but I was learning about computer networks. I was learning all this stuff. And it was a lot of studying, and it was a lot of work to learn all that technical stuff. Because like I said, I was pretty good at math, but I really didn't understand all the computer networking and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that happened is while I was there at Wright-Pat, my first son, my oldest son, was born, and my wife was having some complications, and his birth was the night of his birth was the day before my computer networking final, and it was the hardest class I had. And I tried to get out of taking the final and getting it rescheduled, but the instructor was kind of a jerk and he wouldn't let me. So I ended up taking the test and I bombed it. And that was like, I was doing pretty well in all the other courses, but I ended up getting like a C, barely got a C in that class. And anyway, it was one of those things where, and the guy was a captain, he was an Army captain teaching at this Air Force, but it was like, I will never be like that guy. If one of my guys or one of my soldiers, if they have a family issue, you got to let them take care of that. And you can reschedule a test. You can reschedule if somebody needs to come off a JRTC deployment or whatever, allow them the opportunity to take care of their family if they need to. And so it just kind of left a mark. But my son was born there at Wright-Pat, and now, actually he's serving. He's a major in the Army today. But yeah, that was kind of the training path. And then I ended up going over to Germany for right after Wright-Pat, I ended up going to airborne school. Fort Benning, and then my wife, my newborn baby, and I flew to Germany to begin our 3-year journey there in the 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne in Würzburg.
Hey guys, it's your pal Jack. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the sponsor for this show, which is Stopbox. Stopbox makes this very cool box to secure your items in, or your valuables, or weapons. Could be a firearm, knife, things that you want to keep away from kids. Opens up like so. And the way it locks is very interesting. And you can change the combination, by the way. So you have these actuators on the side. And in this case, for demonstration purposes, the code is to hold down the index finger and pointer finger, and then come over and there's a thumb, hit that, and it opens up. So that's the code. This thing is proudly made in the US of A, so they keep the quality very high. It's also TSA compliant, so you can throw this in a bag and travel with it. And Stopbox also offers a range of other innovative products, including their vehicle safe, chamber lock, and other essential gear designed to keep you prepared and protected wherever you are. For a limited time only, our listeners are getting a crazy deal. Not only do you get 10% off your entire order when you use the code HOUSE at stopboxusa.com, but they are also giving you a buy one, get one free for their Stopbox Pro. That's 10% off and a free Stopbox Pro when you use the code HOUSE at stopboxusa.com. Discover a better way to balance security and readiness with Stopbox. I'd like to ask a little bit about Army signals in general, like for people out there, including myself, quite frankly, that don't necessarily understand all the ins and outs of it. Is your job as a signals officer is primarily helping the unit communicate internally or helping units communicate with one another? What's sort of like the way that's framed out?
Yeah, so it's so every unit has to be able to move, shoot, and communicate. And every infantry unit, even an A team in special forces has 18 echoes, communicators on the team. There are specially trained experts that understand, have the expertise and the technical know-how to be able to install, operate, and maintain the communication systems that unit requires. And the higher you are on echelon, so an infantry platoon may have a radio or two. Now they have Android devices and all kinds of comms. But back in the day, they may have a radio, and they'd be up on one single radio net. As you go up to higher echelons, company, battalion, brigade, there's more coordination and synchronization required, not only down and in with your units, but with adjacent units and higher headquarters. So there will be, requirements for communications at command posts, where decisions are made. And like the special ops, it would be a forward operating base, for example, where you'd have additional communications. It might be satellite reach back or big HF systems that allow you to communicate, with, beyond line of sight to higher headquarters and things like that. And so it's really, you're like the phone company for the Army. You know what I mean? It's like, so like the Verizon or the AT&T for the Army, and you got to ensure that obviously the enemy gets a vote, and if they have electronic warfare capability and all that, you have to have what's called a PACE plan, the ability to have a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. You have multiple options so commanders can command, because decisions don't get disseminated down to the lowest tactical level if you don't have good communications.
All right. And then you went to the advanced course for special operations signals.
Yeah, So I felt like I was a pretty damn good signal officer in Germany. We spent a lot of time, supporting what was called the Reforger exercise, return of forces to Germany. As an infantry division, we had our tactical assembly areas. We would have these things called Lariat advances, which were alerts. There was a constant state of readiness during the Cold War, and at this time, President Reagan had just actually. When I got to Germany, President Reagan was still president. While I was in Germany, George H.W. Bush took over. And then in 1989, Just Cause happened. And I was over in Germany fighting the Cold War, concerned about Russia and USSR, the Soviet Union. And we had our GDP locations. We were, training, we were doing maintenance, we were doing all the stuff that every good unit does. And I was really, I felt like I was a good platoon leader, a really good company XO, and I was learning how to be a good signal officer. And I was pretty excited about, what I was learning. But I also realized that, okay, you had this thing called Just Cause. And I heard about all the units that went. and none of them were coming out of Germany. And then when I wrapped up that assignment, just as my wife and I were, we had another son born while we were in Germany. He's now a special ops communicator over in third group, but he was born when we were in Germany. And as our family was making its way back to the Signal Officer Advanced Course at Fort Gordon, this was in 1990, Saddam invades Kuwait. And I'm leaving 3rd Infantry Division, and there were some guys that had the opportunity to get deployed to Operation Desert Shield. I get to the Signal Advanced Course, and I'm watching it on TV. And units from Bragg are going, as you know, there was a lot of different units that ended up going to Desert Shield and Desert Storm. One of the guys I met, and we became really good friends at the Signal Advanced Course, had just came from this Special Ops Signal Battalion that had just stood up in 1986 called the 112. And he had a certain swagger about him, and he had a certain kind of, mindset and focus. And we immediately kind of became really good friends at the Signal Advanced Course. And he started telling me about this unit at Bragg called the 112 Special Ops Signal Battalion. And so the more I heard about it, the more intrigued I was. And so for my class, there was one slot for the 112, and I wanted it. And I told Signal Branch that I wanted it. And then I went up to Fort Bragg with him. I interviewed with the battalion commander, interviewed with the battalion S3 and the XO, and I told them how bad I wanted to be in that unit. And so I ended up getting the slot. But while we're at the Signal Advanced course, I was supposed to do a couple follow-on courses. And the battalion commander calls me. He says, "Hey, we're getting ready to deploy to Desert Storm or Desert Shield." And it was right before Desert Storm started. He goes, I need you to cancel your follow-on courses. I need you to come into I want to make my S1 and then make you a company commander. And so I was like, absolutely. So as a brand new captain, every captain wants to command a company at least, or an ODA, right? You want that green tab leadership position. And so, for me, it's like, hell yeah, I get to command in a special ops signal battalion. I'm in. Yeah. So I was like, we couldn't leave Fort Gordon fast enough to get to Fort Bragg. And then I get to Fort Bragg, and most of the unit is deployed. And I become the S1, the personnel officer. And they come back, and my first duty is to run the award ceremony for all the war heroes that had just come back, right? So you got this big, and I was like, so I was like, okay, I missed Just Cause. I missed Desert Shield. And I was like, will my day ever come? And I really wasn't worried about it, but it's just one of those things. I wanted to get to Bragg. I wanted to, be part of something. And it was, but I learned a lot. And I had the opportunity to command Alpha Company. We called it Alpha Pride. And the focus was, proud of who you are, what you do, and who you represent. And I took command of the company that it was probably the weakest company in the battalion. And that was an opportunity for me, like on day one, actually. It was actually on day one, I had a chance to make an impact. We had there's this thing called GMF, which I think it stands for Ground Mobile Force or something, but they manage all the satellite constellations out there. And so right after the change of command as a brand new company commander, one of my platoon leaders comes up to me, and we had this ongoing exercise supporting USASOC, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. It was a pretty high visibility exercise. And we had what was called an 85 van, which is satellite hub van right outside of the USASOC headquarters. And they were running comms into, a bunch of the leaders in there. Well, we got notified from GMF, which they're like the big brother of all satellite operations. And you don't want to screw up. And so what happened is they said, we tracked off the bird. They can't reach anybody in the van. They don't know, what the heck's going on. So as soon as my kind of welcome speech to the battalion or to the company was over, I drive over to the USASOC headquarters, and I see one of our specialists walking up with some bolt cutters. And I'm like, Specialist Blanza, what are you doing? He goes, I got to open the van and get us back on the satellite. I don't know what the hell. And then I see this guy named Sergeant Lewis walking up with a Burger King bag. He's got a Burger King bag, and he's like, jaw jacking, just kind of loaf. I'm like, what the hell? I said, Sergeant Lewis. He goes, yeah, sir, I had to go get something to eat. I'm like, okay, you are no longer the team chief for this. Blanchett, you are now in charge of this team. Sergeant Lewis, I need you to see the first sergeant. When you go back to the company area, I need you to see the first sergeant. And he was one of these weak NCOs. And what I noticed right then is, number one, I had to it was a leadership opportunity on day one, but it was also a guy like Blanchett saw that I was willing to make a decision. And take away the burden of him having to work for a piece of crap NCO. You know what I mean? And this NCO, and he was a weak link, and it was pretty obvious. And so Blanchett became a team chief and did a really good job. But for me, it was kind of like day one in that unit. It was kind of an exciting opportunity. But we had, several different exercises and events. We did a big exercise supporting SOCUR over in Alconbury, England, and all across Europe. We had teams all over, to include up in Norway. It was a great event. We did that. We were getting ready to plan for a Cobra Gold over in Thailand. I had an opportunity to go over to do the pre-deployment site survey with at the time, our battalion command sergeant major. His name was Ronnie Beaver McCann. I don't know if you ever met Beaver. He was a first group guy, but he was the 112th command sergeant major. And we were getting ready for all that. And then I was on a JRTC exercise. Actually, JRTC, I believe we were at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas at the time, not Fort Polk, Louisiana, on a JRTC exercise with 7th Group and SOC South. And I get a call from our battalion XO. And he said, "Hey, how much do you know about the special mission unit across post there?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I've driven by the compound a lot. I don't really know anybody that works there. I don't know a whole lot about it." He goes, "Well, they need a captain. They're standing up a new tactical communications troop, and they need a captain for this job." And the battalion commander's looking at one guy, but he goes, "I think you'd be perfect for the job. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah, hell yeah, I'm interested." It was just kind of like, so you go from conventional 3rd Infantry Division to white SOF, and now it's an opportunity to go into a whole nother part of SOF. And so I ended up, trying out, and it wasn't, I didn't have to do the long walk. I wasn't going to, West Virginia selection and doing all the stuff that an operator in that unit goes through. But you go through a lot of the other stuff, the PT test, the psych eval, the background checks, all the, everything that goes into it. And then you go through this interview board, which was pretty brutal, but it was, when it was all said and done, you get out of the board and you're like, holy shit, that was miserable. And then the sergeant major of Signal Squadron comes out, he goes, "Well, how do you think you did?" I said, "I don't know how I did." He goes, "Well, you did great. The guys love you." I'm like, awesome. So I go back to the 112th, and I got to kind of finish up my time. I'm the assistant 3 after my company command. And while I know I'm going from 112 Signal over to the Special Mission Unit, they are doing rehearsals for operations in Somalia. And so I get my badge, I get a lot of my kit, I get my wall lockers. I can come and go into Signal Squadron. They didn't in-process me completely, but they gave me, the Signal Squadron commander wanted me to have access and come over and meet with the guys when I could. And he wanted me to be a role player for all the train ups for Somalia. And so I go out there, while I'm still in the 112th, while they're prepping for, operations in Somalia, I go out to the compound and they're doing all these rehearsals with the Rangers, with the 160th Special Ops Aviation Regiment. And I'm watching these rehearsals happen with all these aviation assets, all these different units, and everything that's going on, the number of role players and what they put into their training scenarios. And I'm like, holy shit, they spent more training budget on this one rehearsal than we probably were able to spend in the, it was amazing. I knew that this is a different kind of place. This is pretty significant. And before I signed into the unit, I actually went on a JRX, a joint readiness exercise. Started out at Fort Bliss, and then we went out to the Nevada test site, and it was with one of the squadrons in the unit, B Squadron. But the day we deployed for the JRX, I went into the Signal Squadron team rooms, and I go in. I think it's in August of 1993, and I'm starting to get to know the guys, and I get to go out on this exercise with one of the squadrons. But I still got to go back to the 112th and finish my job, and so. I go back, and my last day in the 112th Signal Battalion was a Monday morning. It was October 4th, 1993. And so, it was my last day. I'm getting ready to do final out, take all my paperwork, the 201 file, everything, and go from the regular system to the what's called the DASR, which is, where all the special mission units files. So I have to basically sign out on the personnel side in one unit, drive over across post to the new unit. And when I get to this unit, everything was different. Because every time I'd been in the team rooms, it's typical team rooms. I mean, like team house, right? I mean, it's like a locker room. It's alpha males doing what alpha males do, and the camaraderie, the teamwork, the banter. None of that was happening. On 4 October, I walked in there. Everybody was laser focused. Everybody was moving with a purpose. There were guys in there, packing their stuff, rolling stuff, getting it packed up. Nobody was saying shit. Everybody had a total focus mindset. And like it was all on. It was mission was on, and I hadn't seen the news. I mean, I got up, I did PT, took a shower, signed out, and drove across post. And one of the other captains in the unit is like, his name's John Hildebrand. He's like, I said, John, what the hell's going on? Why is everybody so? What's going on? He goes, you haven't seen the news, have you? I said, no. He goes, yeah, let's walk in here. So we go into the squadron conference room. They have 2 TVs on. One was on Fox, one was on CNN. And we walk in, and I see the Somali kid bouncing on the rotor blade. You remember that scene?
Yep.
It was on the news, and it was all over. It was all over the news, and I was like, holy shit. Okay. Because I saw those guys on the day I flew out to the JRX. Everybody from Signal Squadron that was flying to Somalia, they were going out one way, we were going the other. And so it was like, wow. And this was probably around 9:30 in the morning. So I'm trying to sign into the unit through their personnel services troop, which is like their S1 or their HR, human resources entity. Those guys are dealing with mass casualty.
Yeah.
They don't have time to process this new captain. You know what I mean? So I'm just like watching and learning and saying, holy crap, these guys, they'll get to me when they can get to me. I remember the personnel service troop sergeant major, Angie Whitaker, comes up to me and she said, hey, sir, I'm so sorry, but I said, you guys do what you got to do. And so I go back down to the signal squadron, and there was a legendary retired warrant officer, a guy named Mr. Z, Paul Ziesman. He was the deputy commander of signal squadron. He was up at the meeting in what's called the Beckwith room. It's named after Charlie Beckwith, which is where the room where it's the command conference room, basically. And he comes back down from the Beckwith room, and he goes, all right, A squadron is going to deploy tonight. The DCO is going with them. John, he's talking to Hildebrandt, the other captain. He goes, you're going to go over with A squadron. Pete, you are going to be a casualty assistance officer. They've identified you to be a casualty assistance officer for a guy named Randy Shugart. He's missing in action right now. He's probably in escape and evasion mode. Hopefully we can roll him, pick him up. But right now he's missing in action. But I need you to go to a meeting at 1:00 this afternoon. And I'm like, roger that, whatever I got to do, And so that moment, that first day in that unit with that responsibility and knowing what happened, and I think everybody knows what happened afterwards. If you've seen Black Hawk Down or if you've read the book, I mean, Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon, both of the guys that went in to, and gave their life trying to save the pilot, Mike Durant, at the second crash site. They definitely, they were put in for and definitely deserve the Medal of Honor. But to actually be selected for a duty like that on day one, it was like, for me, it was like nothing else mattered at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I needed to learn how to be a communicator in the unit, but I needed to focus on that. And I needed to, and that's what Mr. Z said. He goes, this is no fail, man. This is your job. Everything else can wait, but you got to, do everything you can. And it was a couple of days, I think, before, they identified the remains and they notified, Stephanie Shugart and I was allowed, and I got brought to her house to meet her and help her. And just what an amazing, amazing person. I mean, and Randy's parents, Herb and Lois, they were, just salt of the earth dairy farmers from the great state of Pennsylvania. And just to be able to just help this family navigate that, all the process that goes with, losing a loved one in combat and everything else, especially with like a Medal of Honor recipient, everything that goes with it, because there's ceremonies. It was an interesting time for sure. And one of the things that, as we were going through it, there was a guy, one of the sergeant majors in the unit. his name was Craig Maxim. I don't know if you've ever heard of Craig or met Craig, but he was this wiry, just big old bushy mustache. He was an operator's operator. He was the man. But Craig led he went on every single notification to every family member of the guys from the unit that were killed. But he also led every one of the color details, and they were immaculate, flawless. He had, there was a combination. We had a couple guys from Signal Squadron that were part of the color detail, but they did every single service, memorial service. But when I was getting ready for Randy's funeral, which was in Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, it wasn't at Carlisle Barracks, but it was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. But a former unit member was actually going to the War College at the time, a Colonel Ike Slaughter. So he was like magnificent. He was like one of those guys that, he was helping me kind of like my advanced party, where he was on the ground in Carlisle, and he could help me kind of orchestrate stuff. But if you can imagine the number of people that were coming in from all different locations and trying to orchestrate all this, planes, trains, and automobiles, VIPs coming from all over. I mean, General Downing, just all these different cats and coming from different places, and I was focused on the family, but you have all these heavy hitters, and I couldn't have any hiccups, you know what I mean? So I'm laying out the plan. I go into Sergeant Major Maxim's office, and I'm kind of laying out the entire plan, boom, 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 walking it through and trying to make sure I didn't miss a freaking beat, because again, before Randy's funeral, we had the memorial service when C Squadron came back. We had the memorial service at JFK Chapel there on Fort Bragg. And Wayne Downing, I remember him telling me, he was the 4-star commander at SOCOM at the time. He's like, hey, if you run in, he goes, number one, this duty is sacred, and you do not let anybody tell you no. Do not, if you run into a single brick wall, I want you to call me directly. There was no way in hell I was going to call him. I was just not going to I was going to breach any brick wall. But it was one of these things where I knew the pressure was on. I could not screw this up. I mean, there's probably things I did screw up when I was in that unit, but that was one thing I was making sure there's no way in hell I can screw this up. And so anyways, I'm getting ready for Randy's funeral and trying to, again, take care of the family and all the people flying in and everything, laying it out for Craig Maxim. He's like, damn, sir, you got this shit wired tight. He goes, you consider being an operator? And that was like the greatest compliment, because I knew this guy was legendary. And I was like, oh, sorry, Major, I'm a communicator. I think the unit needs communicators. And I said, that's where I can best serve the unit. But I appreciate the vote of confidence. And, I thought about it, but I knew my place, you know what I mean? And I knew, what I brought to the organization. And, but it was one of those really significant compliments at the time. But yeah, that was kind of my, I guess, between the White Soft and the 112th, and then joining that unit as, a fairly young captain. I think I was about 93. I had just turned 30 at the time. So,
if you're in the market for a new mattress, you've probably seen all the brands out there vying for your attention. Big names, splashy ads, all promising the same thing. But here's the only brand that does it right. It's GhostBed. GhostBed was created and is still run by manufacturing experts with more than 20 years of mattress making experience. They know the craft, and they know how to build a bed that actually lasts. So how do they offer premium mattresses for up to 50% off less than the competition? It's not hype, it's smart logistics. As a family-owned company, that means there's no board of investors to answer to. It's just folks working hard, selling mattresses. These are the true manufacturing pros, and the result is an exceptional cooling and comfort at a price that won't keep you up at night. Every GhostBed mattress includes proven cooling materials backed by a 20 to 25 year warranty. You also get a 101 night sleep trial with free returns if the mattress doesn't work for you, and fast free shipping. Most orders arrive in 2 to 5 days. Right now, as a Team House listener, you can get 25% off site-wide for a limited time. You can just go to ghostbed.com/house and use the promo code HOUSE at checkout. That's ghostbed.com/house, promo code HOUSE. Upgrade your sleep with GhostBed, the makers of the coolest beds in the world. Some exclusions apply. See site for details. I want to thank GhostBed so much for continuously supporting us. It's been going on a year almost. So I really appreciate that. I hope you guys, if you're in the market for mattresses or pillows or bedding, check out GhostBed. You can go to ghostbed.com/house and get 25% off right now. Love you and love GhostBed. Thanks, guys.
And I mean, that's a bit of a baptism by fire arriving to the unit
yeah.
under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how was the rest of your time there helping to establish this joint communicator unit or troop?
Well, so the tactical communications troop, it consisted of running the base station for the unit, the reach back, basically the lifeline for everybody deployed was the base station. So we had operators in the base station, but we also ran, we had a deployable team that ran the unit's command post every time it would deploy. They were the forward communicators. And then we had communicators with every Sabre squadron. So every Sabre squadron at the time had 2 communicators that had to go through the operator training course and be able to pass.
Oh, wow.
OTC. They were direct support communicators for the Sabre squadrons. Now I think they have, a lot more than 2, but back then it was only 2. You had a senior and a junior, and it's kind of like an ODA, but on steroids a little bit, where a Sabre squadron had a couple communicators there. And then, but all of those worked for the TACCOM troop commander. And so I didn't go to OTC, but I got to go to a lot of different training events that were related to OTC. So my first year in the unit, I went to the selection and training squadron, I guess. And you've had like Paul Howell on here before. Yeah. Some of the best operators teach S&T. They teach operator training course. They run selection, but they ran a combat skills course for support folks like myself, communicators, medics, and others. It was only a couple weeks, but it was an abbreviated kind of basic focus on the fundamentals, basic rifle marksmanship, all the kind of PT tests. You did all the stuff that it was like a abbreviated, condensed OTC. I mean, we did ladders, we fast rope, we rappelled off the tower, we ran the O course, we did CQB. I mean, everything that they thought we might need to do or a support guy might have to do, they tried to take all the lessons from Somalia and say, hey, look, never again are we going to have to rely on support guys to go outside the wire and not have them trained and ready on the basics. And so it was pretty awesome to go through that, because I will tell you, on day one, my basic rifle marksmanship, my target, it looked like a freaking shotgun blast. But by the end of the 2 weeks, when we had the long gun competition, I kind of went from worst to first. So it was kind of cool. A lot of the guys in the squadron made fun of me, but it was one of those things. I mean, I wasn't like a laser, a dead eye shooter, but by the time those guys got done with me, I was a pretty damn good shot, and because they know what the hell they're doing and they focus on the fundamentals. And but so I got to go through that. We went through live agent training, where we went to Fort McClellan, Alabama with the OTC course. I did live agent training. Did a lot of role playing for the OTC class as they were going through all the different scenarios. I spent a lot of time, helping S&T, where they would always, request volunteers to be role players. And then ended up going to Halo School in June of, with that OTC class that was going through. I got to go to Halo School with them out at Marana in Arizona, which was pretty cool. But that first year, we did my first real exercise with the unit was an exercise called Hadrian's Wall with 22 SAS over in Scotland and England. And it was pretty awesome. I mean, it was my first time going out as the senior, representing the squadron. And we were out there with A Squadron. It was in December. And I think it was while we were at that exercise, we had members of the unit that were down in Colombia. We got notified that Pablo Escobar had been killed. But there was still a lot going on with exercise or operations in Colombia. And so, I spent the time over with the 22 SAS, great exercise, kind of a little bit of a suck fest because the units try to outdo each other on the training. It was pretty cold. It was rainy. It was somewhat miserable. But when it was all said and done, we went back to Hereford, had a great after action review and drank some suds together in a place. I don't remember the name of the bar, but they called it the Sticky Carpet. But it was just good bonding and camaraderie and they had a similar unit, the 264th Signals organization, that some of the guys there, we became pretty good friends. And then later on, I ran into some of them when I was, the JCU commander after 9/11. But it was a good first year. I spent Easter Sunday in 1994 in Bogota, Colombia, going to visit our guys that were there. That was an interesting time. In the summer of 94, we were planning very heavily for
Haiti.
Haiti. Yep. And, I was the lead planner for Haiti. As you kind of know what happened there. I mean, they aborted the mission. We had guys at the ready, but I did have communicators from my team with Colin Powell on the ground. Colin Powell, Sam Nunn, and Jimmy Carter. I had one of our signal squadron communicators was there, and we had another one up at the White House. I mean, that's how, and they handpicked this unit to send communicators. So what I learned there, just, going through, just all the different, every quarter you'd run a joint readiness exercise, and there was always training events where the squadrons are doing environmental training, whether it's winter training, jungle training, they would do building training in urban areas. There was always a need to participate in those types of events and learn and do everything you can to understand what it takes for the operator on the X and everything that they need to have all the enablers to interconnect them. So I learned how important it was, not only for the assault net, the fires net, emergency resupply, CASEVAC, all the kinds of things where they need a lifeline and they need something now. There's no time to blink. You got to have the ability to connect those guys. And so I spent 3 years in that unit. I wanted, as I was leaving, I went through 2 different signal squadron commanders. I wanted to come back more than anything and be the signal squadron commander. I ended up leaving that unit and going to Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, which was pretty close to where I grew up. Spent a year there before I ended up going out to Hawaii.
And what was the assignment out in Hawaii?
So it was in the 25th Infantry Division. It was interesting because I was before I left Fort Bragg, I knew I wanted to come back to Fort Bragg because my wife had a teaching job. Our kids had friends, and we had a house. We had bought a house. It was like, there's a signal brigade at Fort Bragg. There was a signal battalion in the 82nd. And my goal was to get back to a conventional signal unit, buy a little bit of time, and then get back to signal squadron. That's what I wanted to do.
Right,
get back
right.
to Leavenworth, come back to Bragg, and find my way back into signal squadron. But when I get out to Fort Leavenworth at CGSC, because my records were on the DASR, or they were hidden from the normal system, when Signal Branch came out to interview us and decide where we wanted to go, the branch assignment officer said, "Hey, we want to get you what's called branch qualified, which means be a battalion S3 or an XO or a brigade S6. And that, even if it means going back to Fort Bragg." So I was trying to find a job back at Fort Bragg. When I get out to Leavenworth, a new lieutenant colonel assignment officer and the major's assignment officer were interviewing all the majors from the Signal Corps. It was branch day, and you're meeting with your assignment officer. And they didn't have my ORB. And they had everybody else's ORB in there. And I said, well, I have a copy of it. They didn't have it because it wasn't, I guess because I had just left the unit, it wasn't in the system. And so she looks at my ORB. She says, Germany, Fort Bragg. You spent 6 years at Fort Bragg. You're already going overseas. I said, well, wait a minute. I've been overseas. I was in Germany. I said, and the guy sitting next to her, I said, I can't remember his name, but I said, he told me I got to get branch, I can get branch qualified, even if it means going back to Fort Bragg. I've already got units that want me to come back. And she goes, well, it's not fair for you to do back-to-back assignments in Homestead at Fort Bragg. And just, oh, no, she said, it's not fair for you to just hang out at Fort Bragg while other people are doing, back-to-back tours in Korea. I said, ma'am, have you ever been stationed at Fort Bragg? I said, nobody just hangs out at Fort Bragg. I said, in the units of Fort Bragg, they're on mission. They're on every deployment. You've got the units with the highest level of priority. I said, you don't just hang out at Fort Bragg. I said, I want to go to Fort Bragg for the mission. It's not to hang out in Fayetteville. But she goes, well, okay, but if you did have to go overseas, where would you want to go? And I said, it's like a stump to chump question. I said, okay, maybe Hawaii, Alaska, Italy. I just kind of threw things out there. She goes, and she had just come from Alaska. She goes, why Alaska? Why not Saudi Arabia? I'm like, what? And so I'm like, holy shit, this didn't go as planned. So I go home and I talk to my wife. I'm like, I might be freaking going to Saudi Arabia. I don't understand.
They don't got no beer in Saudi Arabia. Like, hell with that. I'm going to Alaska.
This did not go as planned. But then Scotty Miller, who was in the unit with me, was my lived right across the street from me at Leavenworth. We actually became really good friends while we were at CGSC together. He was, as you know, he was the assault force commander on the ground there in Somalia, and obviously I got to know him pretty well when I was working with Randy's family there. But Scott introduced me to the division commander of the 25th Infantry Division at Leavenworth. So I talked to him, and it was basically over a beer at a place called the Havana Club there on Fort Leavenworth. And it was almost like an interview, and so I ended up getting the opportunity to go serve in the 25th ID. So when I left CGSC, I go to 25th Infantry Division, and my first job is as the division. It's called the ADSO, Assistant Division Signal Officer. Now they call it the Deputy G6, but it's a major's billet. You're on the division staff, and you do what division staff officers do: a lot of planning, a lot of all the different exercises. And in 25th at the time, they have all these different exercises all across the Pacific. Balakatan in the Philippines. You have Cobra Gold in Thailand. You have JRTC rotations where one of the maneuver brigades would rotate back to Fort Polk and go through JRTC. So you're always kind of planning, division activities and events there. So I spent a year doing that. And then I became the battalion S3 at the 125th Signal Battalion. And the great part about that is the battalion commander was a guy named Tom Trowbridge, who had spent time in the unit. He was in the unit before I was. He was a legendary communicator as well. He was a Ranger Regimental S6. He spent time in the Ranger Regiment, and he was the JCU commander, the Joint Communications Commander at JSOC. And so he and I had a history, and we had a lot of had walked some of the same ground previously. And I got to be his S3 for a year, which is really his operations officer, as you know. And so it's conventional communications for a conventional division in the Pacific. But I learned a lot, and it was a great opportunity. And then I stuck around one more year to be. I was trying to work my timing again to try to get back to Bragg, and so I stuck around one more year to be what's called the Secretary of the General Staff, working for two different commanding generals. A guy named Tom Hill, who ended up going to First Corps, and then a guy named Kip Ward, who came in after him. So as a Secretary of General Staff, it's a thankless job. Really, you run the staff for the general, the aides, all the. You learn how a division headquarters runs, but it wasn't a job I necessarily wanted, but it was a job the CG wanted me to do, so I did it. But while I was in that job, I got to go interview and put my name in the hat for JCU, and so I went and interviewed with at the time it was Major General Doug Brown. Doug Brown was a former 160th guy. He ended up being the 4-star at SOCOM, but General Brown selected me to be the next JCU commander. And while I'm working for General Hill, he gets announced to go to I Corps, the First Corps out at Fort Lewis. So he's getting promoted to 3-star. And he and Doug Brown are friends. They've known each other from days in the 101st together, and they've known each other for a long time. And General Hill wanted me to be his aide and leave Hawaii and go to Fort Lewis, but I had just been selected for JCU, and I was like, "There's no freaking way I want to go be his aide." I've been the SGS for a year, but I said, "Sir, I think it would be an honor to be your aide, but it would not be the honorable thing to do." I looked General Brown in the eye and told him I wanted to be his JCU commander, and I am not. I want to be the JCU commander. That's what I want to do, and I want to command. So I had the opportunity. We ended up pulling our kids out of school a little bit early in 2000, and I took command on our anniversary on the 12th of May in 2000. And at the time, everything was focused on the Balkans. A lot of work going on inside the JSOC community. It was all about the Balkans and Tuzla, all across Bosnia, Sarajevo. I mean, they were hunting the war criminals. PIFWIC, I think is what they called the operations. And so, again, one of my first trips when I got to JCU was into to see what we were doing on the ground there in Bosnia. But we had a really awesome training cycle. The Joint Operational Readiness Training Cycle for the JSOC units. Inside JCU, we have these named exercises that we run every quarter. And we do everything from, basic establishment of the ISB, the forward staging base, mission support sites, putting your communicators through the drills, just battle drill after battle drill. We had communicators that would go up and work in the National Capital Region at the FBI headquarters for what's called the emergency support teams, where those guys were on a short string. They had to be wheels up within an hour and a half. So we would constantly, every month, we would do a rotation up there. We would do shipboard training where we would establish a float staging bases on a variety of Navy vessels. We would do that once a quarter. I got to do my first quarterly training brief to General Brown on the USS Teddy Roosevelt, which was pretty awesome. But I will tell you, we had a joint readiness exercise out in Guam and in the Pacific where we were on the USS Bellawood, and it was miserable. We couldn't get comms, and I thought I was going to get fired. It was one of those things where I thought I was going to lose my job because we just could not. There was problems with the satellite antennas on the actual ship, and we had difficulty communicating. Where the JSOC commander had to leave the vessel because he didn't have reliable comms, and I was frustrated as hell because I felt like I let him down. But we hot washed it, we figured it out, and the unit had succeeded so many times before that and after that. He realized that there was a problem, and it was beyond what our operators were able to fix at the time. But so while we're going through all that, we have a change of command, and Dale Daly takes over for Doug Brown, and Daly's the new JSOC commander, and he stands up this capability called Advanced Force Operations, AFO. And so they pick a former squadron commander over at the unit to lead it, a guy named Scotty Miller we've talked about before. Again, the same guy that was on the ground in Somalia. So Scott's a personal friend of mine. We're neighbors. We live in the same neighborhood there in Pine Valley in North Carolina. We would drink beer and share stories together and all that. So Scott's standing up this, and I handpicked some of my very best communicators inside JCU, which is saying a lot because in JCU they are considered the best communicators in the Department of War, and so best of all the services. But I handpicked three guys that can function in this low-vis environment, that have the maturity, have the ability to help Miller stand up this capability. And so we go through another joint readiness exercise out at Nellis Air Force Base, kind of running the traps and getting our muscle memory and improving what we do. But then in September of 2001, we're on this big exercise. It's the first real theater-wide AFO focused joint readiness exercise. And so we have folks spread out from England, Germany, Hungary, and because we still had stuff going on in the Balkans, we had an operating base in Tuzla. We were flying from the UK in a C-17 I was actually with the JSOC J3 and a bunch of the battle staff that were flying in to establish a staging base in Tuzla. When across the data net, we get word that the World Trade Center and the Pentagon had been, airplanes had crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And the communicator watching the data net for us pulls this up. He's like, "This doesn't make sense," because it was everything. Almost all the traffic up to that point was exercise traffic.
Right.
And we get this, and it's like, holy shit.
Does it come across like this is not a drill? Not part of exercise.
Yeah, it didn't say that. But it was like it didn't say exercise, and it was like, bam. And so I get it, and I give it to the J3. He's like, holy fuck. And I'm just like, and so we're sitting there, and we land we land on the ground at the airfield in Tuzla. As the ramp comes down, I remember Master Sergeant Wayne Haddad. He was the JOC NCO. He walks up, meets us on the ramp, and basically just told us in. He was like, "Hey, the exercise has been canceled. We're going into crisis action planning." So it was a few days before we could actually leave and get back on U.S. soil. But yeah, it was another kind of monumental moment there as the commander of DoD's finest communicators. I guess now Department of War's finest communicators.
Oh, and what was kind of like the tone, I guess, when you got back to the States? Because I mean, now you're planning for a real war, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. So we get back, and it's typically you're on a string for a 4-hour sequence. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
If there's a JCS order to launch the National Mission Force, you typically it's usually no notice, and it's the O300. I mean, you go through the drill. This was crisis action planning to deliberate planning to building concept of operations on what can we do, what will we do, what are we gonna and all this stuff has to get briefed up to the president, right? And so we're going through the drill at Fort Bragg. We've got a bunch of different scenarios going on, and we start pushing communicators out probably. I think it was around the 7th of October. We start sending LNOs to different locations, and then I can't remember what day we actually deployed, but we ended up deploying to establish a staging base at Masira, Oman, and then we had a float staging base on the Kitty Hawk. Comms were good, by the way, on that one, which was real world, and it mattered, and when it mattered most.
That was where the super long helicopter infill was flown off the Kitty Hawk. Right?
Yeah, so we're at Masira, Oman, with the staging base, and you got the whole task force there, right? And so the Rangers are getting ready for Operation Rhino, and the unit, the Special Mission Unit out of Bragg is getting ready for Operation Gecko, and those are set to go down 19-20 October. So we're going through everything. A couple things that I got in a couple heated arguments with the J6 at the time, because they wanted to use there was a deal with call signs. They didn't want to switch call signs from one squadron to another or something. So we had to resolve that. We got that resolved. But there was crypto was going to change on midnight on the 20th. It was going to, yeah. And so I tell the J6, I said, hey, we got to talk to the CENTCOM J6 and have them freeze the crypto key.
Yeah, yeah.
He didn't want to do it. And he didn't want to tell the boss. He didn't want to tell the JSOC commander that we had a crypto changeover in the middle of the op. And I said, sir, we got to.
No bueno.
Yeah. And so I'm a lieutenant colonel at the time. He's an Air Force colonel. And I tell General Daly, I said, hey, sir, we're gonna have to either roll early, or we're gonna have to freeze the crypto, but we can't have operators flying and be dicking around with changing the crypto key in the middle of the op. And so I ended up calling back to JSOC. I called one of my buddies that was in JSOC at the time, and then I ended up personally called. I kind of went over the head of the JSOC J6, and I personally called Dennis Moran, who was the CENTCOM J6. I said, hey, sir, we got a little bit of a problem. I think, you can make a decision, but we need to make a damn decision, because we can't have this go down in the middle of the op. And so they ended up rolling early. But it was created a bit of a kabuki dance, because the guys go through the rehearsals, and they're on one set of key, and then they got to come back and reload all their crap with the new key. But they did it, and they were able to do all the comms checks. But it's like, why don't we just freeze it? And you know what I mean? But it's one of those things. But if the J6 at the time didn't have the guts to tell the boss that he needed to, that we need to do this, I was like, you can't just let it happen. We got to be proactive and like make it happen.
Well,
make it happen. You got to take care of the guys on the ground. You can't let them just, anyway.
That would have been
a little bit frustrating.
One of those situations you mentioned where all of a sudden the reach back is cut off because the commo is rolled over.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just that can't happen.
Yeah.
You just can't allow that to happen. So then, we ended up pushing. I mean, so we we went kind of from that mode of the initial operations, Rhino and Gecko, to operation called Relentless Pursuit, I think, or Relentless Strike. I can't. Went from Relentless. We ended up. We kind of rolled from multiple operations, a multitude of strikes, to something called Relentless Pursuit, which kind of took us into the Battle of Tora Bora. And so at the time, Miller had brought over a whole bunch of different operators from different units and started standing up this AFO task force. And they established advanced force operations. And they were some of the first elements, and I added some additional JCU communicators with them to establish comms in Bagram. And this was when Bagram, it was a
bombed out Russian base.
There was no green beans. It was dusty. There was minefield. There was mines out there, live mines. It was a very, very rustic, to say the least. And so we get out there and we get set up, and guys are using the bathroom in a piss tube, the white PVC pipe tube, burning their stuff. I mean, it was luxury living at its finest. But it was and then I remember Gary Harrell had come over. He was leading an element from CENTCOM, and Miller was leading AFO, and that's when kind of things started happening where the first squadron that came in was B Squadron, and then can't remember who came in behind them, but we were kind of doing a rotation in about January, and so I came back in January of 2002, and I sent we kind of did a rotation and had some other folks out there. So I wasn't out there during the Roberts Ridge or the what was it called? Pete Glaber ended up. I know Pete was on your show before, but Pete ended up replacing Scotty Miller as the AFO lead out there
for Tora Bora.
Yeah, what was the name of the operation? Anaconda.
Anaconda. Yeah.
Anaconda. Yeah. So I had some guys out there, supporting JSOC at the time. That was a pretty ugly event. What went down with Anaconda, and I don't know if Pete was able to tell you the story there, but yeah, there was a lot of hard lessons learned on that one. I ended up giving up command of JCU in the summer of 2002, and then I got to go command another unit. So, which I went back to the 112 Signal Battalion to become the Signal Battalion commander. And while I was supporting JSOC as JCU commander, the 112th had supported John Mulholland in the 5th Group up in Uzbekistan. On the early days, they had a company up there supporting him, and by the time I got to the 112th, they had been rotating, in and out of Afghanistan. And when I took command in July of 2002, the 112th had folks all across Afghanistan. They had a team up in Djibouti supporting Horn of Africa, and they had a team out in the Philippines supporting Siege Soto-P, or Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Philippines. And so I think the picture that was on the splash page, that was me out at Organy on my first battlefield circ there, pulling a couple of my guys out of Organy and switching out the teams there. It was a great opportunity, to go from JCU to the 112th, continue serving in SOF, continuing in command, continuing, to support the fight. While we, my first year in the 112th, about December of 2002, we started planning real heavy for operations in Iraq. There was CENTCOM level exercises that were all kind of setting the stage for what would we need to do if we were going to go into Iraq. And in the spring, obviously, of 2003 is when Operation Iraqi Freedom kicked off. And I basically deployed a battalion tactical command post, co-located in Al Udeid, Qatar, with supporting General Gary Harrell, who was the SOCCENT commander at the time. But we had, one of my companies was in Romania supporting Charlie Cleveland in 10th Group. And I had another company in Jordan and spread out between Jordan and Kuwait, supporting John Mulholland and Fifth Group. So, and one company had just returned from Afghanistan, and they were kind of our reserve back at Fort Bragg. So the majority of my battalion was deployed from 2003 for the initial phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
How did that kind of go on, or how did it turn out for you from like a signals perspective? I mean, a lot of times we hear the operator perspective or the soldier on the ground, the tanker. I'm kind of interested in the communications piece of it.
Yeah, so I would tell you that I mean, even though you're in special ops and you have probably better communications capability than the conventional forces, at least we did at the time, our systems were still too big, too clunky, not as maneuverable as they needed to be to support what needed to happen. And especially with, 10th Group, where they had established a staging base in Romania, and you have this big satellite hub in Romania. Typically, you don't jump a satellite hub. You jump the spokes. You jump the single dish, but General Cleveland wanted to get his Jasotov out of Romania and into northern Iraq. And so jumping the hub was a bit of an undertaking, and it was challenged. So, I mean, the guys, fought through it, but we learned a lot of lessons, and what we were able to do, though, from the lessons we learned on OIF-1, by the time I gave up command in 2004 of the 112, we had pretty much modernized the whole battalion. We had, support of USASOC and SOCOM. Really, SOCOM was in our corner, helping us, modernize get smaller, lighter, more capabilities out there, and basically upgrade almost every team that we had in the inventory, which was good. But a lot of that was you kind of got to go to war with the kit you have, and then, you build as you come as you are, build as you go, and constantly improve, right? And that's what we were trying to do, is constantly improve and try to make things better for the commanders and the soft elements that were out in the field. So.
And after the invasion and everything, what was sort of the next step for you?
So I spent about 4 months over there, came back, and then we had downsized our support to about a company level. So we started rotating companies, always had a company rotating over the whole time remainder of the time I was in command. And so, and I took a couple more trips over to visit the guys, but I was not there, permanently after probably about, I guess, back July of 2003. That's when it started getting, after the initial phase of OIF, started getting ugly into the insurgency, right? And so things were starting to get a little uglier there, but yeah.
And then what did you do after the 112?
So I got selected on what's called the SMU board, the Special Mission Unit Selection Board, to command a mission support squadron for a special mission unit up in Northern Virginia, based out of Fort Belvoir. So I got selected. I got notified. Actually, I got notified while I was in Iraq, visiting. I was visiting the task force in Iraq, and I got a call. And I remember I got the call from the Deputy Commanding General of USASOC, and then I get to the units, the special mission units, forward deployed headquarters in Baghdad. And I remember Bennett Sokolic congratulating me. It was like he already knew. He didn't know. I guess a lot of folks knew before I knew. But anyway, I got notified while I was there. And then the following summer, I took command of the mission support squadron for this special mission unit. And it was a unique, very unique command. Everything the unit does is low visibility, kind of clandestine mindset, and be able to, connect these operatives that are spread out in a variety of, very dangerous places and make sure they have everything they need to function and survive. And so it was a unique opportunity there to command a similar but very different kind of unit. And so for me, it was 6 straight years of commanding in special ops, between JCU, 112th, and then this other special, between JCU, the 112th, and then this other special mission unit. It was, I loved it. It was great. But while I was in that unit, every time the unit commander would deploy, he would put me in charge to be like the rear D. I was running the unit in the rear, and we were constantly rotating a squadron commander over forward deployed to run all the unit operations that were happening between Afghanistan and Iraq and a lot of the adjacent countries. Okay, because a lot of what we were doing was intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, and those types of things. And so, as in March of 2005, I got to deploy. We had previously called this the forward deployed element Dead A. It was I think you'd talked about Dead A in your book actually, but it was they named it. It was just our commander had called it that, but McChrystal wanted to change the name of the task force, and so he called it Task Force 356. And the story behind the task force is one of our operatives was actually killed in a suicide bombing at the Mosul dining facility in December 21st. A guy named Rob Odell, Special Forces 18 series. He was a member of the unit. He got killed. And because our unit was kind of leading this task force, General McChrystal picked the number based on the Julian date of the date that Rob got killed. And so 356 was what, the Julian date of December 21st. So I was the first commander of Task Force 356, which was pretty awesome. And I get over there and I'm replacing a guy named Sean Mulholland, who's related to John. Sean he had one of the other squadrons at the time, but we did the battle handoff. And then one of the big things that happened, I had a tremendous team of in the task force supporting the task force. I had a smaller Task Force 356 that we had a foreign fighter exploitation team. So I had members from our unit, some intel support. I had members from the FBI, HRT that was on our team. And what we were really trying to do is understand and run the rat lines back to all these different countries that were fueling the insurgency with foreign fighters. And so a lot of it was, things that were coming off of computers. We had a computer forensics exploitation expert out there. We were getting information from the tactical screening facility, the TSF, where they were doing before guys would go to like a lot of the prisons. They would, there was interrogations going on to kind of exploit and analyze what was happening, so they could, disseminate that information and find and fix. So that was kind of we were there during this whole thing called the F3 EAD cycle. I think you're familiar with that: find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and disseminate. Where we came in was really the exploit, analyze, and disseminate. Exploit, analyze, and disseminate. We were trying to pull the thread on all of that stuff, and working with the task force on the ground that was doing multiple operations every single night. We had there was a joint interagency task force being led over in Afghanistan. There was another one in Iraq, and then we had working directly for me. I had operatives and analysts at various embassies and stations co-located with their counterparts, where really we would fuse the intel, put a plan of action together, and then give it to a force to take action. And typically on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan, it was a direct action, and one of the units would take it. But if it was in one of these other countries, it was usually internal law enforcement where they would take action based on information, And so it became a pretty powerful machine. And one of the things that, while I was there, we had this special event that we had planned where we brought in a chief of base and one of my senior liaisons that was in I'm not going to say what country, but they came in with some equivalents to, I would say probably equivalent to like the US FBI, where they brought in some investigators that were hardcore, really they understood the culture and they were going to do the interrogations. And so we launched this thing at Abu Ghraib, and it was on the 2nd of April in 2005. And so I fly out there with my team, we get everything set up, and we're kind of going through our first day of planning. We're getting, kind of putting on our game face to figure out how we're going to do all this. We're coordinating with the staff there at Abu Ghraib. You have conventional units there. You have MI units, you have military police, you have, Marines guarding the facility and all that stuff. So we're trying to get the lay of the land and figure out, we've got this nasty little hooch we're staying in. We set up our comms. We had a couple communicators from the Joint Communications Support element with us. it was kind of a mixed bag of teammates, and we built this little, I would say, a little cross-functional team to go take on this mission. And so, we get there on day one, we get everything set up, and that night at Chow, right after the call for prayer, at about 7:06 p.m. or 19:06, local time or whatever, we're eating chow. We're at the dining facility, and we hear, boom, like, damn, that was close. And we hear another one, and it's like, like, holy shit, they're bracketing the dining facility. And then all hell broke loose. And for about 2.5 hours, it was just constant state of rockets. There were 4 vehicle-borne IEDs that hit the towers of the camp. There was, the gunfight went on it went on for a long time. It was pretty significant. And we ended up, a couple of our guys, we went to Chow, we didn't bring our long guns with us or nods, but it was getting dark and all. And so a couple of the guys went back and they scooped up our long guns. We were still at the dining facility because they didn't want a lot of people running around the compound. But we were kind of bracing ourselves for the Alamo moment. You know what I mean? Because we didn't know what the heck was going on. There was I think like 70 some insurgents got killed. I think there was like 44 wounded, U.S. wounded. We had one guy that basically had a shrapnel scrape on his arm, but that was about it. But it was, I was supposed to leave that night at 9 o'clock. I was getting the team set up and I was going to go back to Balad. I called back and told General McChrystal, I said, hey, there's threats. There's discussion of having, like, the threat indicates there may be more of this. And I don't really feel comfortable leaving my guys out here and not being here. So I'm going to stay for the week if you're okay with it. And I didn't have great comms with all the other outsides, but I had a good NCO back at Balad that was taking care of all the other outsides. So I had good enough comms, but in Balad I had great comms. But here I had, but it was like I could do what I needed to do from Abu Ghraib for a week, but I didn't want to leave the team and go back to Balad when they thought there might be, this was during the heavy days of Zarqawi, just doing brutal stuff in a variety of locations. And that same night, so I forgot to tell you this, but while I was at Balad, my brother he was in a conventional unit. He was a logistician in the 1st COSCOM's Corps Support Command and out of Fort Bragg. They were on the other side of Balad, but every Sunday night or every Sunday afternoon, he and I would meet at our DFAC, our dining facility, for lunch. We'd have lunch together, and then we'd smoke a cigar and drink near beer afterwards and just kind of shoot the crap and tell stories about what happened. And so that Saturday night when all hell broke loose, I sent him a note and I said, hey, man, I'm not going to be able to have to meet you for lunch and cigars tomorrow. Crazy thing happened. I'll tell you when I get back. And his response was, yeah, no kidding, me too. I'll talk to you when I can. And so come to find out, I get back to Balad, and he was leading a convoy of a logistics unit that was getting ready to go replace another unit. And they were about 2.5 miles outside the gate of Abu Ghraib, going to a logistics facility when their convoy got blown up by, they actually lost guys in the convoy. They hit an IED and came to like a standstill, and they had Apache gunships called in and actually helped them get through that situation. But that all happened, myself and my brother, within just about a 3-mile radius of each other on the same night, which was pretty crazy. When we told that story to my mom, she about lost her mind. But
I bet. And before we move on, I wanted to ask you sort of what you learned about the foreign fighter networks, because it's obviously kind of a nebulous thing, but I remember the intel we were getting at the time that these guys were coming from all across North Africa, through Syria, they were into Iraq.
Yeah,
what did you learn?
There was a lot of them coming from North Africa. There was a lot of them coming through Jordan. The rat lines were running through Jordan and through Syria. There was a lot coming from places like Saudi Arabia. It was there was no like single source of foreign fighters. There was they were coming from all over the place. And Zarqawi, he was, God rest his soul, but he was, he was he was a vicious. He was doing everything he could to fuel the insurgency and wreak havoc on our forces on the ground, and I mean, just ruthless killings of. I mean, thank God he met his fate, a few months later. But yeah, it was pretty brutal. But I would say, I mean, there was no single source. A lot of them coming from North Africa. A lot of them coming, from. I mean, he had ties back to Jordan, obviously. So some coming from Jordan. Yeah. Yeah, but the folks we brought over were brought over for a reason because a lot of them were coming from that particular country.
Right.
And I'm just, yeah.
And around after this assignment, was this when you went to be a part of the Joint Recon Task Force?
No, yeah. So there was a lot of different units doing clandestine-like stuff, right?
Right.
And General McChrystal realized that we needed to establish some best practices and some capability. So you had the Ranger Recon Detachment, you had Operational Support Troop at the unit down at Fort Bragg. You had, I can't remember the name of the squadron that out of Dev Group.
Black Squadron.
And then you had the unit I was in, and so what they did is they picked a guy named John Burnham. I don't know if you know John. He's a retired Navy SEAL, but John and Heitman, I can't remember Heitman's first name, but he led the Black Squadron group. And then so what they did is they stood up this Joint Readiness Task Force co-located with our unit at our headquarters at Fort Belvoir, and really trying to get a handle on who's doing what, where, and for what purpose for all the clandestine, related activities. It was kind of advanced force operations that Miller and those guys that stood up was a very small sliver, but all the units were building their own intel capabilities. They were all building their own, they were running sources, they were running, and doing signals intelligence and all that. And so it was really trying to get it all organized and focused, and they stood up a task force to kind of coordinate and deconflict that stuff. So we wouldn't have folks tripping over each other, I guess, and really trying to establish some best practices for a lot of that capability.
So it's sort of like JSOC for the recon community.
Yeah. It was really a JSOC entity.
Yeah.
But our boss was asked to stand systems in place using, diplomatic pouch to get capability in and get it distributed to different locations. Just variety of tradecraft and fieldcraft capabilities that constantly were evolving. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And from there, you were off to the War College?
Yeah, I ended up. So when I was Mike Nagata, so on the trip later, I went back to Iraq, and it was just a short visit, visiting our guys. And the first time, I think Troutman was my boss. The second time, Mike Nagata was my boss. And I got selected for brigade command while we were in Balad. I remember we were kitting up, getting ready to fly out on a helicopter out to to link up with some of our guys that were in a safe house out on the Syrian border. And I was flying with Nagata and a couple others, and he gets the brigade command slate. And commanders typically get notified when somebody on their organization either gets promoted or gets slated for command. And he reads my command slate. He said, "Well, Pete, it looks like you're going to command a brigade. You got the DISA Central Field Command, whatever the hell that is." He goes, "You can't spell disappointment without DISA." And I was like, I never forgot that. But, so anyway, I get slated for command, and then I leave the unit and I go to National War College. And so I'm at National War College in 2006, 2007. My son, my oldest son, had just enlisted in the Army as an infantryman. And he signed an airborne contract. He was supposed to go to 82nd. He's going through one station unit training at Fort Benning, Georgia. And he gets pinpointed to 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division. And at that time, 3rd Brigade, 10th Mountain Division, the brigade commander was a guy named Mick Nicholson, who later became my boss. But they were deployed, and they were in the Korengal. They were all on what's considered Regional Command East. And I'm at the War College at National in downtown DC, spending my year there before I go into brigade command. And I go down to my son's graduation, and he's excited. He just made it through something. I didn't even think he was going to survive his teenage years, because he was more of a hellion than I was. But he ended up making it through basic training and AIT as an infantryman, and he's slated to go to the 10th Mountain Division. When I go to his graduation at Benning, he can't wait to introduce me to his drill sergeant. And so I go meet his drill sergeant. I was like, oh, this is freaking awesome, man. He's proud of his accomplishments, and his drill sergeant told me some great things about him and all that. Then he gets to 10th Mountain, and he's up at Fort Drum, New York, and the brigade he's going to is deployed. And he's going as a replacement because they've lost a bunch of soldiers. And so he's in 3rd Brigade, and he's slated to go to Afghanistan. He just doesn't know when. And I'm sitting at, I'm living at Fort Belvoir. I'm attending the National War College. And I started asking him about, it's like, Matt, hey, what are you doing for like pre-combat training? He's like, we're not doing anything. We're freaking painting walls, moving wall lockers. I said, well, he goes, well, they got rear D, the rear detachment NCOs. They're not the cream of the crop. They're, as proud as he was of his drill sergeant, he was frustrated as hell when he was, in hurry up and wait mode, sitting back at Fort Drum, North Carolina, or Fort Drum, New York. And so I'm like, this sucks. And I realized Mick Nicholson's NCO, his command sergeant major, was a guy named Jim Redmore. Jim was the fire support NCO at the unit at Fort Bragg when I was there in Signal Squadron. We got to know each other pretty well. And so I sent Jim a note, reach out to him on email. I said, hey, sorry, Major, I don't know if you remember we worked together in the unit, but my son is in your brigade, and he's getting ready to deploy. And when I saw him graduate, I basically told the story about when he graduated. He was, he had nothing but confidence in the non-commissioned officer corps, and he was as proud as he could be. But he's on his way to Afghanistan in a few weeks, and I want to make sure he's an asset and not a liability, because he's not getting any training right now. And he goes, sir, I remember you. I remember you well. He goes, my daughter's over in Iraq right now. I know exactly what you're going through. I got this. And that weekend was Labor Day weekend, and Matt he gets a pass, and he comes down to visit me at Fort Belvoir. And I had just left the unit, and I had all the medics that worked for me. And so there was a high-speed special forces medic that was in the mission support squadron. And he brought over a dummy, and he brought over, a mannequin, basically brought over all kinds of training aids for medical training. And so we're having a cookout on our back porch at Fort Belvoir. And the guy's name's Neil Gleason. Neil is running Matt through scenario after scenario of, first responder, combat lifesaver kind of stuff. And just the whole weekend, like Saturday and Sunday, and it's just boom, 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 just running him through drill after drill. And he puts together a med kit for him. And he has this laminated, training thing. And it's just SF Medic 101 kind of stuff. But by the time Matt got done, drill after drill, just doing this, he had a lot of confidence in casualty collection. You know what I mean? Just treating a casualty and all that stuff. And he was like motivated. It was like the first bit of pre-deployment training he had was by accident over beer with one of my buddies from the unit. But Matt left, and Neil, he built him a med kit with a little, in a canvas pack. And he said, hey, man, when you get back up to Fort Drum, when all you privates are sitting around pounding your puds, waiting for leadership from an NCO, and you're not getting it, just pull this stuff out and do everything we did this weekend, do it with your buddies. And Matt's like, cool. He loved it. And so he goes back up to Fort Drum. About that time, the ricochet effect had happened from Sergeant Major Redmore back to the rear D. And they started, putting them through their paces and running, taking them into ranges and doing all the kind of stuff that they should have been doing. But yeah, just, we owe it to those young kids before we put them out there to make sure that we're not sending them out there, and it hits home pretty hard when it's your own son. You know what I mean? So I called in a favor, but it was worth it, and it needed to happen.
Was your son ready to drop his SFAS packet after that experience?
Uh, yeah, well, I don't know about that. He was still a private first class, but he was pretty motivated. But then he gets to what's funny is he goes back to Afghanistan, and by this time, my brother that was with me in Balad a few years earlier is now in JSOC as a logistician, and he's in Bagram. And so Matt flies into first he flies into K2, I think, then he flies into Bagram, and my brother meets him at Bagram at the airfield, and he's duffel bag drag carrying all this crap, and they go have lunch together or they go have chow together or whatever, and they get caught up, and then he flies out. I think he ends up going out to Oregon E, same place where I picked up my team from the 112th, but he ends up going out there. They're in Vermel, I think. I think they end up in Vermel. Is that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So he's in. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book by Sean Parnell called Outlaw Platoon.
Yeah.
But Matt was in that platoon, 287.
Oh,
I think
shit.
B Company
Okay.
287, if I'm not mistaken. He was in. Sean Parnell was his platoon leader. By the time Matt gets there, they're 6 months into the rotation. So you got this newbie showing up, and he's fresh meat, obviously. So he's got to like find his way amongst a unit as an FNG, kind of trying to earn his stripes and figure out life. And the first time he goes outside the wire, one of the other they go to set up a casualty collection point for another platoon that had got hit. And everything that Neil taught him on our back porch that day, he was able to actually put into practice on his first mission outside the wire, which was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Then that brigade, I don't know if you remember, but that brigade got extended. Typically, they were doing 12-month rotations. That brigade got it. They were supposed to come home over the holidays, and in fact, some of the folks they had already done the left seat, right seat with the brigade that was coming in behind them, and some of the elements of their unit had already returned back to Fort Drum, and some of the families had left Christmas presents waiting for their arrival right after the holidays, where they were, they left the tree up and they were left Christmas presents waiting, and they got notified they weren't coming back till like Memorial Day. So he ended up, spending probably about 9 months over there. But when he got back, he was, again, it was one of those moments where my other son and I went up to meet him at Fort Drum, New York. We kind of went back we went to the welcome home thing, and I flew up there. It was Memorial Day weekend. I remember it pretty clear. But when they got back and they came in, he couldn't wait to introduce me to his squad leader. There was a guy named Staff Sergeant Jeffrey Hall, former Ranger. It was in the 10th Mountain, and I asked Sergeant Hall. I was like, like any dad would do, I guess. I was like, so how'd he do? He goes, I'll tell you what, sir, he's fucking steady in a gunfight. And I was like, holy shit, that was the greatest thing anybody could ever tell me. You know what I mean? I was like, okay. I was like, wow, that's good to hear. You know what I mean? And so anyway, later on, okay, after the War College, I get to DISA Central Field Command, and you can't spell disappointment without DISA. I'm responsible, for all the like enterprise, the big pipes for all of the CENTCOM AOR, so we've got a lot of different things going on. We're trying to build up capacity, network capacity, big pipes for reach back, for Iraq and Afghanistan. And at the time, Iraq was hot and heavy. Petraeus was leading Iraq. I can't remember who was leading Afghanistan at the time. But anyway, while I'm at disascent, we go through a couple major challenges. Number one is we had this event called Buckshot Yankee, and Buckshot Yankee. The 101st was the forward deployed in RC East, Regional Command East. A good friend of mine was the G6 there, named Brett Reister. What had happened is there was cyber vulnerabilities being on all USB drives, and they were able to kind of penetrate networks and move laterally through the networks. And they were considered a huge risk by, at the time, it was NSA and Joint Task Force GNO, Global Network Ops. This was before Cybercom actually stood up. But this operation became a freaking nightmare for everybody on the ground.
Yeah.
And they were trying to identify, all the risk and had to wipe a bunch of different machines, clean them up, and get rid of what they believed to be all of the cyber risk and the cyber threats on these. It significantly changed a lot of tactics, techniques, and procedures of what people were doing when they were going out on aircraft and when they were going out in vehicles, because thumb drives at the time were being used for almost everything.
Yeah.
And it created quite a challenge. But that was kind of thing one that was pretty significant
who
during
was
my
behind
time at
that
Disassent.
attack?
The other thing that happened that was really significant was there was a cable or a anchor drag across some undersea cables off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt. And during this time, it wiped out about 95% of the intra-theater or the intertheater reachback comms from CENTCOM AOR to anywhere in the world. Basically, these big pipes rely on these fiber optic cables that go undersea. That they carry a tremendous amount of data. And when we lost that, I get a call in the middle of the night as the Disassent commander running the theater net ops center for all of CENTCOM. So everything that's happening, from the network side, we're monitoring it and managing it and trying to, operate, defend, and constantly improve the network. And we get this call that, we had a cable cut. And first thing's like, okay, and what does that mean? Well, we have no reach back except satellite. It's like, oh, that's pretty significant because the throughput on satellite and the latency and everything else just, it's with two major operations going on simultaneously, it created a real challenge. So we ended up, figuring out how to execute something called minimize, where you minimize unnecessary traffic, focus on the stuff that matters most. We had to bump up add some additional satellite capacity to certain organizations out there, reduce for others. We were making all kinds of moves, and at the same time, we're working with all these telecommunications because a lot of this is commercial telecommunications providers that do all this, and it had impact not on just operations. It was the banking industry, everything. I mean, it had huge impacts globally on commerce and everything else. But they had to get these cable repair ships out there, and it took a while. And we had to alt route a bunch of that stuff, but all that stuff, was happening. And then we had a General Petraeus ended up coming out of Iraq and taking over CENTCOM. And I think that's when we went through Buckshot Yankee, so the first cable cut thing actually happened first, but then we went through Buckshot Yankee, which was the big cyber event. I had a new DISA director, and we were looking at how do we get, more capability over in the theater, more fiber connectivity, multiple routes, reduce the add capacity, add resiliency, and reduce the single points of failure. So we spend a lot of time and energy working that and coordinating that and setting up different routes. And one of the things we were trying to do is establish a fiber ring around Afghanistan, around Ring Road, and connect a lot of the key nodes. And we were beefing up the comms in Kabul, in Kandahar, and in Bagram. And so as the Disassent commander, I go over in 2009, it's in the spring of 2009. I think it was right after Buckshot Yankee, actually. And my son is deployed again. This time he's still in 287, but now he's Sergeant Gallagher and not, PFC Gallagher. And while I'm visiting the 101st in Regional Command East, and we're looking to set up, a big communications node there and add capacity, I get a chance to fly out to FOB Airborne, which is where my son was located. And so, my NCO IC and I hop on a 47, and we start flying into FOB Airborne, and we're going to spend the night. I'm going to meet with Matt's battalion commander. We're going to do midnight chow with him and his buddies, spend the night, and then we're going to link up with, at the time, the deputy commanding general of the 101st and the G6 were going to meet us the next morning, and we were going to go out to Pakistan and do some other stuff. And so, anyway, I fly out to FOB Airborne, and as we're flying in, they're getting rocketed. And we get waved off. And so we end up landing at Fob Shank, which is where the 3rd Brigade headquarters is. And so I was going to go in and see my buddy Dave Haight. We were in the War College together, and I was going to go tag up with Dave and kind of check in with the brigade commander. And we were on kind of a milk run. So we ended up catching a ride on a supply bird that was going from fob to fob, right? So we get off, my NCO and I get off the bird at Fob Shank, and we start heading into the brigade talk when one of the crew chief from the aircraft runs up and grabs us and said, "Hey, we got the all clear from Fob Airborne." And so we're gonna head back over there. I was like, all right. So we get back in the helicopter and we go back to Fob Airborne, and we land, we drop off, and it's like freaking pitch black. And we see a couple little lights. And then my son walks up to me and goes, "Dad, you're not gonna let a couple freaking rockets cause you to puss out?" And he was basically busting my chops. But he goes, "I can't believe you weren't going to land here because of a couple of rockets." He goes, "We get that shit all the time." I'm like, "All right, buddy." So anyway, it was pretty cool to see him. I mean, he had been downrange for a little bit, and so anyway, we ended up having midnight chow. He was in the same squad. He was actually a team leader now, still working for Sergeant Hall, he showed me his hooch and everything and his living arrangements. We got to, stayed up and had midnight chow with him and all of his buddies. Everybody was in his squad, and kind of telling stories like you do at a combat outpost there. And then we get back, and then he gets selected to be a squad leader, and he gets moved from that team in that squad for working for Sergeant Hall. And now he's leading a squad that does all what's considered all the what are they? Key leader engagements, all the KLEs. When his battalion commander was doing battlefield circulation, they had a PSD, and Matt led the security detail for Colonel Gallagher, the battalion commander. That was his new squad. So he got moved from, I think, B Company over to HHC. And so he got fleeted up to squad leader and moved to a different role. Well, about a week after he got fleeted up to squad leader and moved to a different role, his squad, Sergeant Hall and I think 3 or 4 other guys, got killed by an IED blast.
Oh my God.
So I'm sitting in my office back at Tampa, and I get this call from Matt. And I told my deputy was a GS-15 civilian. I said, "Hey, if I ever get a call from my son, I don't care who I'm talking to, I don't care what I'm doing. If he calls, interrupt me, I'll take the call." And so I had somebody in my office, and Sid was a little nervous. He didn't want to interrupt me, but he said, "Hey, sir, your son's on the phone." So I get on the phone with him, and I could tell something was wrong. And I hadn't heard the news of this, and he said he had sick. I mean, he had never dealt with like grief ever in his life. He hadn't even seen it, one of his grandparents die or anything like that. He had not, I don't even know if he'd ever been to a funeral up until that point. And so, he calls me and he kind of is telling me what's going on. He goes, "I'm over here in HHC." And he goes, "Those were my guys. Those were my buddies. I've been with these guys for years. That was my squad. That was my team. Those were my guys. I should have been there." And he had significant remorse, and he had guilt and everything else, and he was dealing with it. That was a long conversation about how to deal with grief and how to compartmentalize it and be able to, when you're sitting in your cot or when you're working when you're working out at the gym or whatever, or if you're at the dining facility, you can think about all of that. But when you're on the turret and you're out there and you're doing, PSD for those key leader engagements, you got to lock that stuff in a box, and you got to focus, and you got to make sure you keep your head on a swivel and focus on the mission. That's why you're there. And it was a hard conversation for me just to hear the pain in his voice. You know what I mean? And I had just had probably just a few weeks earlier, had midnight chow with all those guys. And so I tried to make it a point to go to all their funerals. I hit all but one. But yeah, it was tough on him, but he's a stud. But yeah, that was an interesting, dad moment, and being the father of 2 soldiers, and they both, between them, they've got, 5 combat deployments. So, Matt's had 3. He's had two in the 10th Mountain and one with the 82nd. And then his younger brother, Jake, had two combat. He was deployed in Operation New Dawn as a young paratrooper in the 82nd, and then he got deployed in Inherent Resolve. They were both in Iraq at the same time. So in 2017. But yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, being immensely proud, but also very worried about your sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I'd much rather be deployed myself than be worried about them when they're deployed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you probably every other parent too. And then 2009, you're with the AFPAC Coordination Center.
Pardon?
2009, you were with the.
Oh yeah. So I leave this ascent, right? And they have this big signal conference every year. It was down at Fort Lauderdale, and I get told by the chief of signal and by the Army CIO G6, the NetCom commander, that, hey, look, we're going to try to get you to Fort Gordon to be the chief of staff, and it should be a great job for you and may make you competitive. I'm like, all right, cool, I'll do that, whatever you guys need me to do. But so I think I'm going to Fort Gordon to be the chief of staff, and my wife and I are actually celebrating our anniversary. We're down at Key West, Florida, and I get notified that I'm been by name requested by General McChrystal to stand up this thing called the Pakistan-Afghanistan Coordination Cell. It was actually Scott Miller, who was on the Joint Staff as the DDSO, the Deputy Director for Special Ops. At the time, Miller was the Deputy Director for Special Ops. McChrystal was the Director of the Joint Staff. And they're standing up this cross-functional team on the Joint Staff to focus the attention of DC and all the interagency and everybody on the main effort, which President Obama made clear was Afghanistan and Pakistan. So they built this thing, and Admiral Mullen at the time was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It was established in 2009, and I was one of the plank holders. I had the chance to work between myself and there's a Navy SEAL, was the other 06, a guy named Tim Szymanski. Miller handpicked both of us basically and got McChrystal to sign the by name request. But they built the team with people they knew and trusted. And so it was pretty cool it was an opportunity to do something other than signal and go in there and be a deputy director for a very important entity at the time. There was a lot of antibodies. The Joint Staff J5 didn't, he felt that was his job. He didn't want some 1-star, having the same credibility as a joint director. But if you know Scotty Miller, if you know Mick Nicholson, who came in behind him, and every other PAC director that came in, I mean, they were all high quality, war-fighting leaders that were the right guys for the job. But it was an interesting opportunity. So when we first get there, it's McChrystal. When we first getting set up, McChrystal just gets on the ground in Afghanistan, and he's doing his assessment. And I remember, it was late nights every night, early mornings, late nights, weekends. It was probably, of all the jobs I had in 35 years of service, that was probably the worst grind, because we were constantly in just churning out, read ahead material for the chairman and the SecDef. And at the time, the chairman was Admiral Mullen, and the SecDef was Bob Gates, Secretary Gates. And it was during this period where, McChrystal was going over there, and he wanted to, and they were ramping up the number of forces, and he was doing his assessment. And I get a call on Saturday night from the director of the Joint Staff's office, and they said, hey, somebody leaked McChrystal's assessment. And Bob Woodward, Bob Woodward, the author, and he said, Bob Woodward has a copy of it, and he let us know that I need you to come in, and we need to go through this assessment, and we need to look for what should be redacted, because he wants to give us a shot to redact things that should be redacted before he goes to the press with it. So that was good on him to do that. So I call in a few guys, got Dave Doyle and a couple of Intel analysts and a few folks, and we end up meeting at like 9:30 on Saturday night, and we're going through the McChrystal assessment line by line, and the guidance was, if it's a risk to mission, risk to force, and risk to international relations. Everything else is fair game. Okay, leave it in there unless it will cause a risk to mission, the risk to the force, and risk to international relations. So we spent all night going through that and making a recommendation of what should be redacted and why. And so the next morning, Miller, he let us do all the work, and then he meets us the next morning with the director of the Joint Staff, General Cartwright, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Michelle Flournoy, who was OSD policy. And we're sitting in the vice's office, and we're going through it. And some of what we recommended being redacted, they said, no, that's common knowledge. That's not, we don't have to worry about that. So we finally get to a spot where we're comfortable saying, okay, we'll leave this in, take that out. So then it's got to go to Mullen. So Sunday morning, we have the meeting with the vice and Flournoy. Then the next day, it has to go to Mullen and Gates. And so, we're churning all day on Sunday. And then it finally gets to Secretary Gates and Mullen, and they're satisfied. It's like, okay, we can let this go. This should be no harm, no foul. It's fine if he prints it. But then Secretary Gates' press secretary comes down, and he wants me to email the redacted version to Bob Woodward. I said, absolutely not. I said, I am not. I will send you the redacted version, but I am not going to be the guy that pulls the trigger on an email to Bob Woodward on unclassified networking.
I don't blame you.
He goes, damn, I got to go log in. I said, yeah, but I'm not doing it. I said, but anyway, yeah, it was interesting. Then, constantly supporting, trying to do everything we could to support General McChrystal, make sure that ISAF was synchronized with CENTCOM, was synchronized with the Joint Staff, was synchronized with the services, and it was good. We established a thing called the AFPAC Hands. I don't know if you remember that, where we were trying to get guys, trained on the language and the culture, and there was folks identified from all the different services. It was a good idea. I don't think it actually delivered as we wanted it to, but trying to get guys, culturally astute and learning, Dari or Farsi and trying to, and Pashto, and learning the languages and being able to go over there and actually, be difference makers. And some of them did better than others. I mean, but by the time I ended up, my next job, I ended up from there. I went over to be the ISAF J6. But it was a good year in the Pakistan-Afghanistan coordination cell, but I could not wait to deploy. But a year of that churn, I was ready to get downrange. And so as we're approaching, the spring, I think I'm going over to be General McChrystal's J6. And then I don't know if you ever heard of a lady named Sally Donnelly. Do you know who Sally is? She's a strategic communications expert. She's spent a lot of time. She was a special advisor to the chairman at the time, Admiral Mullen. And she spent some time in media. She does a lot to prep people for, going through congressional hearings and testimony and stuff like that. She's very, very knowledgeable. Anyway, she walks down with a couple copies of the Rolling Stone article and drops them on my desk and Tim Szymanski's desk, and we start reading it. And as soon as we read like the first paragraph and a half, it's like, oh crap, this isn't good. And then, so McChrystal ends up obviously resigning and gets replaced by General Petraeus. The good thing is I had met Petraeus when I was the disascent commander before, so I had never worked for him, but prior to that, but I worked, with him when I was down at disascent, and he was a CENTCOM commander, and when he was in Iraq. So I felt comfortable enough knowing, if I wasn't going to work for McChrystal, I was going to be working for a good boss. So I ended up deploying in August of 2010 to be the ISAF, J6 there. It was a big push there, was really getting everybody on the Afghan Mission Network, which was the coalition communication or computer network where everything was releasable, and really trying to get U.S. off of SIPR and really, writing for release and sharing information with coalition partners and actually, trying to operate as a coalition with everybody on the same network. It was a NATO job, so my staff was an interesting mix of people. I had a Canadian deputy when I first got there. He was amazing. I had a Polish frequency manager. I had a German sergeant major. I had a French plans officer. I had it was a mixed bag of donuts, man. It was awesome, and it was very difficult to find anybody on my staff that could speak clear English, let alone write, clear English for staff products. It was quite challenging. So I spent a lot of time kind of really muddling through some stuff. But it was an interesting time. I learned a lot working for General Petraeus. I spent a lot of time trying to do battlefield circulations, trying to pull the whole J6 community together from all the regional commands and all the different units and stuff that were out there. It was in the height of the surge, so there was a lot happening during that time. Um, the, Obviously, the biggest thing that happened was, and it wasn't, I was not involved with it at all, was the Neptune Spear, the operation to take down, to kill Bin Laden. That happened while I was there, but had absolutely nothing to do with it. I come in the morning for our standard, battle update brief, first thing in the morning, go in to try to make sure everything's working. So when the commander takes his update brief, he isn't frustrated with the comms and the VTC and everything else. So I go in a little bit early, like I did every morning, and then they got the TV on and they're getting ready for the Obama's speech after the operation had happened. But the operational security for that was from president on down, through JSOC was pretty tight. I mean, I don't even think they let Petraeus know until the operation was ongoing. I mean, that's how clear, how good the OPSEC was. And then shortly before I redeployed after, I was there for about 13 months. Had the horrible crash of Extortion 17, where we lost all the special operators that were on the Chinook. That was a pretty brutal incident as well. Through my time there, there was a lot of I think they've been making quite a bit of progress. I had Petraeus for probably the first 11 months, and then I ended up having John Allen for the last couple months there. Then I came back and I spent a year as the XO to the CIO G6 back in the Pentagon. It was another, interesting job, a little bit of a grind, not necessarily a job you really want until it's over. And then while I was it was a test of my resilience. I'll put it that way.
I mean,
being deployed with guys like McChrystal and Miller and Mick Nicholson and Joe Votel and all these different leaders, that were just so calm and poised under pressure. To just going back to the Pentagon and seeing the stupid stuff people would just freak out over when nobody's shooting at you, and you just watch and learn and live working for some of the most poised leaders under pressure. And then you get in an environment where, they flip out over the craziest stuff. But anyway, it was an interesting year. I was kind of, it was a position that they picked me for, again, because this was probably about the third opportunity I had to be looked at for Brigadier General. And while I was in that job, I ended up getting selected. And so my next role was I got selected for 1-star, and I went out to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and commanded what's called Network Enterprise Technology Command, NETCOM, which is, they run really all the IT infrastructure for all the post camps and stations for the Army. So it was more of an enterprise IT type role, about 16,000 people spread out all over, the globe. Pretty big mission. But the biggest challenge I had in that role was dealing with sequestration. So we were furloughing, and we had a pretty heavy concentration of civilian workforce. And we had to go through the challenges of sequestration, trying to figure out how do we keep the network up when you don't have any money, and trying to make sure we focused on ensuring that all of our OCONUS connections weren't bothered. And we took all of our risk in CONUS. And there was a method to the madness there. Is all your 4-star headquarters in the Army were in CONUS, and all the Army senior leaders were in CONUS. And if we could isolate everything forward deployed in Indo-PACOM and Southwest Asia and in EUCOM and Korea and everything else, and make sure that they could kind of focus and operate without any risk emission. We would assume risk in stateside because we know the senior leaders weren't going to tolerate it. We would be able to get the resources we needed. So there was a little bit of method to the madness, but it was interesting times. We were trying to manage, down to the dollar every individual contract, and a lot of this, enterprise IT is a lot of it's contract labor, and so it was creative contract management, and just to try to make sure that we could keep the phones up, keep all the VTCs up, and the networks running so the Army could continue to function. But it was an interesting time, especially for the civilian workforce, because they were furloughed for quite a bit of time. And from there, I spent a couple of years at NetCom. I was the deputy commander for a few months, about a year, and then I ended up being the acting commander for the second year. And then from there, I ended up going to CENTCOM to be the J6 for General Austin, who I had worked for when he was the director of the Joint Staff. He was the first 4-star in CENTCOM. And so I get there in late May, and I start my transition the first week of June. And my first day as the J6, after the left seat, right seat with my predecessor, was the day ISIS went rolling into Mosul. And so we ended up going right into crisis action planning for what ended up becoming Operation Inherent Resolve. So that was, again, another tremendous opportunity, another baptism by fire in a new role. But it was good, pulling all the communicators together, trying to find creative ways to stitch together the coalition, rebuilding a lot of the big connectivity that had been atrophied in Iraq, because there wasn't a whole lot left in Iraq, but there was still fiber, and there was still capabilities that weren't hot. So we had to figure out what was available to us and what we could reestablish and start building an interesting connection for this coalition that was forming under Operation Inherent Resolve. I did that for a couple of years. I ended up getting promoted to Major General. I actually thought I was going to go to, they were looking at me to either go command what's called CCOM, Communications Electronic Command, or possibly the Cyber Center of Excellence. But then I get notified that I'm going to be what's called the AONS Director, the Architecture, Operations, Network, and Space Director for the G6 of the Army. And so I ended up working for the new G6, or the G6 of the Army, a guy named Lieutenant General Bob Farrell. And when I get there and I have my first office call with him, I'm like, "Hey, I thought I was supposed to be going to CCOM. What happened?" He said, "General Milley happened. Milley wanted you to come here to the Army G6. And part of that was because Milley got to know me when I was on the Joint Staff, and I think he trusted me, and he brought me in. He knew that the Army network was pretty jacked up, and that the Army didn't have the network it needed. And there was this report that was written from the Institute of Defense Analysis that was directed by the House Armed Services Committee Airland Subcommittee that really wanted to take a good hard look at the Army's network, because the network was not the network the Army needed to fight against a peer adversary. And so I got selected to lead what's called the Army's Network Cross-Functional Team, and spent my last 4 years leaning in to try to modernize the Army network. And that's everything from, multi-path, resilient communications in a contested environment, where you're contested in space, the electromagnetic spectrum, and cyber, trying to find resilient capabilities that can function in that environment. Being able to establish a common operating environment for computer, for command and control, and being able to communicate and synchronize all the warfighting functions, trying to streamline and make our command posts more survivable, more mobile, reduce signature, and then really working on joint interoperability. So those were kind of the 3 or 4 lines of effort we were focused on. And we were driving it pretty hard, and I did that from 2017 to 2021, and that's where I culminated my career in the Army. I ended up, we went through COVID, which was an interesting time. We went through some major fielding of new capabilities to a lot of the units called the Integrated Tactical Network, providing units smaller, lighter, more capable comms connectivity than they had before. And that's going to be a constant work in progress because technology keeps evolving, the threat keeps evolving. And so what we kind of found and what we decided then is we made a decision to stop fielding capabilities that weren't going to be needed in the future fight. And we tried to fix the ability for immediately for units to have better capabilities to fight immediately, get them capability that was either being leveraged by the special ops community or by others, but get them new kit that was capable without trying to develop something new and take years to develop and spend, a fortune. And by the time you field it, it's obsolete. So trying to use a lot more stuff off the shelf and then capitalizing on stuff that the special mission units and the special ops community was using. If it could scale to the Army, we were trying to, feed, deliver that kind of capability into the Army. So it was a great mission. I had a very small team. I like to call them the most powerful platoon on the planet. There were about 24 people assigned, and I had about, I would say, attached, I had about another 25. So it was roughly about 50 folks that were really trying, doing the heavy lifting of trying to modernize the Army and get a network that will allow the Army to do the command and control that it needs to be able to do. Again, the focus was peer adversary. Think Russia, China, think electromagnetic or electronic warfare, and being able to fight through all that. So that was fun. It was a good last few years. And then in July of 2021, I hung up the uniform and I made my move into industry.
How did that feel after 35 years of military service and the way you describe your career? I mean, it's a great trip, a great ride. You did all the things you were supposed to do, got promoted to 2-star. What was it like to finally hang up the uniform?
Everybody tells you will know when it's time, and I knew it was time. I was kind of seeing the writing on the wall. There was only a few other things that I could do if I was to. I hit 5 years in grade as a 2-star, and it's kind of like, okay, it's time to get out of the way and make room for some other guys to move up. If I was going to be a 3-star, which I don't think I was going to be, it would have been the Army G6 or DISA or possibly the Joint Staff J6. And at the time, they picked a great guy to be the G6, a guy named John Morrison, personal friend of mine. They picked a Marine to be the Joint Staff J6, a guy named Dennis Kroll. He and I served together in CENTCOM, another great American, great leader. And they picked an Air Force leader for DISA. So I kind of knew that, there was nothing, the music stopped and there were no more chairs, and I was okay with that. Because I didn't really want to do 3 more years of grind. I was, a couple of those jobs would have been in the Pentagon, and it was time to move on. And I was I served longer than I ever thought I was going to be able to. I went in thinking I'd do 4 years, build a little technical skills to offset my math degree and figure out where it would take me on the commercial side. I ended up spending a lot more time and being able to do a lot more things than I ever dreamed possible. And I think it was good. The time was right for me personally. And so I was looking at all kinds of different things. I reached out to a whole bunch of peers, a whole bunch of former bosses, folks that used to work with me, folks that used to work for me, folks I had met in industry over the way, and on my way out, it was kind of during the height of COVID. It was, early summer of 21. COVID hit in 20, but, everybody was working hybrid, at the time. Almost all of my interviews were either Zoom calls or Teams calls or whatever, not a lot of face-to-face. And I kind of narrowed my search down to, I was looking at everything, and I felt like, I've got 35 years of experience. I need to be able to use that to give something back. And with a son that's, former infantry, now special ops communicator, another son that's former infantry, now as a military intelligence officer, the company I ended up joining, CACI, was a perfect fit for me because I can leverage my, technical skills, my leadership, my domain experience, and be able to provide capabilities that's going to help those guys, give them solutions that will allow them to do their jobs better. So for me, it was a good fit. And there was jobs I was looking at, companies I was looking at that were big, that were big bureaucratic machines that would have reminded me of serving in the building. There were other companies that were big bureaucratic machines that would have reminded me of serving in something like DISA again. And then there was this company, which reminded me a lot of JSOC because it's got structure, it's got tremendous, I mean, it's 40+% veterans, a lot of support to the soft and intelligence community and across all the federal government. But what I liked about it is they had the structure in place, but they had been really on a trajectory of going from kind of butts and seats services to high end, very unique, very technical, mission focused capabilities. Everything from space to airborne platforms to terrestrial, everything from command and control communications to ISR, electronic warfare, counter UAS. I mean, it was a great fit for me personally to feel like I could come in, I could bring something to the table, but I could also learn something. So it was a good.
What
one of the things people. Oh, go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
was just going to ask, specifically, what do you do at CACI?
So I'm a senior vice president in the. It's called our C3I, Command and Control Communications Intelligence line of business. So our primary customer base in the division I'm in the division that does tactical and platform C3I. But our customers are Army at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Huntsville. We support SOCOM with a big program at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, that supports all of SOCOM and with their deployable communications capability. We do some work with the Air Force. We do some work with Customs and Border Patrol. We run their Air and Maritime Operations Center for them, and we run the DHS ICE Tactical Communications. I mean, it's a pretty good portfolio. It's kind of right in my wheelhouse, but I like it. And one of the things that when I was leaving, a lot of other retirees and folks tell me the thing they missed the most when they got out was the camaraderie. And the thing I like about this company, because you got so many veterans and from the CEO on down, everybody's so mission focused that the camaraderie is there. I mean, I feel like the people I work with, the role I have, I feel like I can do good in the role. People I work with, I feel like I can have fun, and feel like I'm with like-minded individuals that get the mission accomplished. And it's actually, for me, it's been a pretty good fit. I've been doing it for about a little over 4 years now.
And tell us about the 6-8 Alliance.
Yeah, so another great piece of advice I had when I was transitioning was you're going to want to do different things like be on boards or do consulting part-time. And so I immediately, when I transitioned back in 2021, I stood up an LLC and I called it 6-8 Alliance because the unit I was in up in Northern Virginia, the motto was Isaiah 6-8. When the Lord says, whom shall I, who will go for us? And Isaiah 6-8 says, it is I, Lord, send me. And send me was kind of the unit motto. And so I had to pick a name, and I was trying to find something that wasn't already taken. So I set up an LLC in North Carolina for, really it's focused on consulting, leader development. If I get to sit on any boards or anything like that, I'll do that through the limited liability company. I'm also had the honor of, speaking at a ROTC commissioning a few years ago at Campbell University, and we bought a house right outside Campbell, right on the golf course there at Keith Hills by Campbell University. And when the president of the university found out I was moving there, he asked me if I wanted to be an adjunct professor. And so I met with the dean, I met with the chair of the Homeland Security Department. And so I have 4 different classes I teach in the Homeland Security Department. I teach one on foundations and concepts of terrorism. I teach a course on intelligence and national security. I teach a course. I'm getting ready to teach a course on Homeland Security and another one on national and international security. So they're all undergraduate courses. 200 through 300 series. But it's a lot of fun. It's a good opportunity to do good and have some fun. Stay connected to the youth. Contribute to my local university there in North Carolina. And,
I think we have a question for you from a viewer or listener. But
Okay.
Pete, you mentioned that you might be working on a book also.
Yeah, I'm putting some pen to paper. I'm
Yeah.
trying to get it structured. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to call it, and I'm not sure exactly what it's really going to be. I think a a bit of an autobiography and a leadership book.
Hmm.
That's where I want to go with it. I'm just trying to make sure it will resonate. Hopefully, it will resonate with some folks beside myself. If nothing else, I want to leave it as something that maybe my kids and grandkids will read
You should.
and be able to hear some stories they wouldn't otherwise get to hear. But yeah, I'm working on it right now. It's a long way from publication though.
That's great.
I've got a whole bunch of stuff jumbled together, and trying to get it organized into some sections, and I still have a lot of editing I need to do.
D, what do we got for?
Alrighty, we got from Sean. He asked, "Can you talk about the overall frequency of having to troubleshoot Army comms issues, and what's the most extreme action you've had to take or heard of to reestablish communications?"
Good question.
The most, say that again about the frequency.
Sorry about that. Hold on. What's the most extreme action you have had to take or heard of to reestablish Army communications, and the overall frequency of having to troubleshoot Army comms issues?
Yeah, so I will tell you, there was I think the most extreme challenge I had was actually on a float staging base in the Pacific. We were operating out of Guam, and we were on the USS Bellawood. It was a Navy vessel, and it was as well as the Joint Communications Unit commander. And I had the best communicators on the planet on my team, and we were out there, and we had done this multiple times before, and we could not make it work. And the extreme, I mean, the because it was a staging base, and the JSOC commander, who was a 2-star at the time, and I was a major, I could not provide him the comms he needed. He had to depart the vessel and go back to the intermediate staging base to command and control. It was frustrating. It felt like mission failure to me. We stayed there and tried to identify and isolate the problem and continued to work. One of the tier commanders from the Navy side, he was on the vessel, and I didn't want to leave the vessel and leave him stranded without comms. So our guys constantly troubleshot it, and we realized it was a problem inside the system, inside the Navy ship, where we just couldn't fix it. Our guys couldn't fix it, and the Navy couldn't fix it, and it was the only afloat staging base where we've had that kind of a troubleshooting problem where we could not find a solution. I think another, I mentioned the cable cut in Iraq. I mean, that was significant, just the sheer impact it had on, because at that time in 2007, 2008, having all two simultaneous wars going on in Iraq and Afghanistan, and all the reach back requirements that those 4-star commanders on the ground, back to CENTCOM, back to the Pentagon, and the fact that they were operating basically on a shoestring, with satellite connectivity and significant reduction of bandwidth. A lot of messages couldn't go through. That was a pretty significant challenge. And I would say on the tactical side, at the lowest echelon, I think being in situations in Afghanistan where you've got all the different the crew systems and the counter IED systems, and you got communication systems on a lot of these convoys and platforms, and the spectrum was so congested that if you had some of your counter IED systems up and running for force protection, a lot of the comms wouldn't work. And so we were actually we weren't being contested through electronic warfare, but we were congesting ourselves by just mismanagement of the spectrum. We had stuff that was just co-site interference on antennas and different things like that. And so you had to find creative ways to when to turn off and turn on the systems, and be creative on kind of establishing some TTPs for that. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Pete. And before we get going tonight, is there anything that we didn't get to talk about that you'd like to mention?
I just think that, I know, you had Pete Blaber on here before. He talks a lot about common sense leadership. I think, I established something I called common sense leadership years ago, and it was, and it applied, it kind of helped me out through the military a little bit, but it was one of these things where, having the five senses, and I call them the five senses of leadership, and that's a sense of pride. And I think if you go into any organization and they have a sense of pride in what they do and who they are, what they do, and who they represent, typically that's kind of the key to a high performing organization. And I think, as a communicator, having a sense of urgency is important. When you do have a problem with the spectrum, or you have a cable cut, or you may not be able to fix it immediately, you may not be able to get the answer from the top, but you got to figure that downtime is measured in seconds, and you got to get after it, and you got to have a sense of urgency. I think it's important to have a sense of direction. Know where you're at, where you're going, and how you're going to get there. And that's not just when you're driving from here to, from North Carolina up to New York. If I was coming up to see you in person, I would need to have a plan, right? But it's also, if you're a leader and you're mentoring a young soldier, or you've got an employee, it's like, when you sit down for performance counseling, it's like, here's where you're at, here's where I'd like you to go, and here's how you get there. And I think helping put that sense of direction in place, I think that's, it's a key part of counseling and mentoring, no matter whether you're in the military or in any world, in any job. I think having a sense of purpose too, understanding the big picture. I had a leader one time that had a little sign on his desk that said, why leads what and how. And if the leader knows why things need to be done, and the people that are working for him know what to do and how to do it, typically they can usually be successful. But I think, if you have a bricklayer putting one brick on top of another, if he knows he's building a cathedral, he'll be a little bit more excited about putting one brick on top of another. And I know Sidney Shacknow used to use this example. You know who Sidney Shacknow is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He says, you got the guy and he's putting one brick on top of another. And you ask him what he's doing. He says, I'm putting one brick on top of another. And you ask the other guy, what are you doing? He goes, I'm building a wall. Can't you see? It's going to be a big, beautiful wall. And you ask the third guy, and the third guy says, I'm going to build the cathedral. It's going to be the most beautiful cathedral. He goes, that guy has a sense of purpose. He takes pride in what he's doing.
Right.
So anyway, sense of purpose, knowing the why, knowing the big picture. And I think it's also important to have a sense of humor. Okay. And this is, I was kind of a little bit of a smart ass growing up. I was sometimes the class clown. Like I said, when my dad died, I kind of had to buckle down and become the man. But I feel like I haven't lost my sense of humor. I just got to know when to temper it and, make sure I don't say the wrong thing in the right, and offend somebody unintentionally. But I think it is important to have fun. I think it's important to be able to laugh at yourself. I think it's important not to be thin-skinned and be able to have a good time, because I think you can have a hell of a lot more fun, being ready when you can have, tell a few jokes every now and then and be able to take a joke. I think, I guess what I'd leave you with is my last kind of mantra that I latched onto. My youngest son, when he was a teenager, and I was in the unit in Virginia, he was playing travel hockey. He was the captain of his hockey team, and he had what he called the 3 rules of Gallagherism. And he was the hockey captain and said, okay, Jake, talk me through this. He goes, find a way. Don't be that guy, and give him the business. I said, all right, explain it. He goes, find a way, Dad. Find a way to get the puck. Find a way to score. Find a way to win. Find a way. I'm like, all right, I like it. He goes, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy that gets a penalty when the game's on the line and we got to play a man down. Don't be that guy that, violates curfew and, has to sit the bench. Don't be that guy that does stupid shit. And if you find that guy, give him the business. A little tough love, a little performance, a little, wall-to-wall counseling, whatever it takes, give him the business. I'm like, all right, I can live with that. That's pretty good. So anyway, don't be that guy. Give him the business. But I think the most important of those 3 was really find a way. And I think, growing up as a special ops communicator, I mean, I like to call myself a special ops communicator, even though it was only about a third of my career in special ops. I think that's what really gave me the fire in my belly to want to continue serving and want to keep doing this. Because I feel like, kind of like Abrams' charter, for the Rangers, if you can take back what you learned to the regular Army and make it a better, make your unit better, I think you've done something there. And I felt like, even though I was never a Ranger, having the privilege and honor of serving in some of the best special mission units in the Army, what I've learned there, I've been able to take to some of the conventional assignments, and I think make the organizations better. So for me, it's about being able to take something, bring what you've learned and be able to contribute to the whatever organization you find yourself in. So anyway, Jack, I want to thank you and for giving me the opportunity to be on this. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you spending your evening chatting with us. This has been really interesting and insightful for me.
Yeah, I know you have a lot of good shows with gunslingers and folks that are doing a lot of stuff where, they're working on muzzle velocity and, close quarter battle. And there's some real, you have some real no kidding, warriors and gunslingers on here. I mean, I've worked around the nation's heroes and supported the best of the very best. And I've just been blessed to, like I said, consider myself a special ops communicator, and I've loved every minute of it.
We've also had all kinds of other people, from CIA analysts to a combat weatherman who is a hero in his own right. I'll embarrass him by saying that. He has a Bronze Star with Valor. All these incredible people that you get to meet through doing a show like this. It's awesome. And I've tried to get special ops logisticians on the show before, and I've had a hard time getting them to talk, but the logistics are, as you know, it's paramount.
Oh, it's
none of the other
everything.
stuff. Yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, thanks again, Pete, and I hope to talk to you again soon. And for everyone else out there watching, thanks for joining us on the Team House. Check us out on Patreon if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks, Jack.
Hey guys, I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the high side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox and it will have, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, KIT, Kilo India Tango.com/join.